Hello and welcome to the Full Tilt Dynasty podcast / the Legendary Upside podcast / the SportsGrid Fantasy Football podcast. This is our third crossover episode to discuss our consensus Dynasty rankings. I'm Jakob Sanderson. I'm here with Pat Kerrane. I'm here with Davis Mattek. And are you boys ready to talk about some running backs today?
I'm just really ready to argue about Najee Harris. I think it's going to be good times. Yeah.
I wandered into the ship chasing draft last night. I think it was even before you guys went live. A couple people in the comment section were asking if I would take Najee Harris that listened to our episode last week where it was teased that I was thinking about Najee. That Pat said I might need to think a little harder about Najee Harris. Pleased to report that I did draft Najee Harris last night in the best ball draft for the bit. So we'll see. We will talk about Najee Harris shortly, but maybe before we talk about Najee Harris, so I don't think any of us have it RB1 overall, we can start maybe not even at the top because we actually talked about Bijan Robinson in our rookie-focused episode, but maybe I'll ask this.
We don't need to talk about Bijan, the player, but we need to talk about where Bijan and McCaffrey are in the overall, I think. Because I think we went pretty deep into Bijan, the guy, and the trade value and stuff. But I think we should get into what it means, even in a startup, when you're taking a running back with probably your first pick.
Absolutely. So if people, if by chance this is your first episode of these Dynasty Rankings pods that people listen to, this is our third. We talked about the rookies. We talked about the wide receivers. Today is the running backs. And we're talking about it in the context of our overall rankings, which is a consensus of the three of our individual Dynasty rankings. And so, let's talk about Bijan in the grand scheme of things. We have Bijan in our leg up rankings. I see that we have him at, I believe, 8. So we have him behind Justin Jefferson and Ja'Marr Chase, but we have him right in the middle of that second tier of elite quarterbacks of Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert, and Trevor Lawrence.
So I think so we're on the same page. I think formatted rankings is the one that is pulling in the average of our ranks. Yeah.
Okay. I was looking at the leg up rankings. Formatted rankings is the one.
That's the one that's just purely averaging our 3 ranks, which is, I think, the best way to look at this right now.
Is there a formatted overall? I'm only seeing running backs right now. On this
I filtered down to running backs, but
I see.
Do that.
Okay. Yes, that is true. Although I think what I said is still accurate. We have Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert, Trevor Lawrence, then Bijan Robinson just ahead of Justin Fields. So he's in that second tier group with those quarterbacks. Is that where you would take him in a startup? That's maybe my question about Bijan is how I value him in trades is differently than how I value him in a startup. But
that's really and we're going to keep coming back to this I don't think any of us have a hard out today. So who even knows how long we could possibly go. The thing with Bijan is I don't object to obviously I ranked him 9th, the same as Pat, but I do think it would be very hard to take him there, to be sitting at the clock
at
109 and be like, you'd become the annoying guy who's like, anyone want to trade back? Anyone want to trade up? The startup guy who's always trying to trade down.
The worst startup guy is the guy who trades up to 9 and then's like, taking offers.
That's the worst startup guy.
Yeah, that's Michael Leone. If you've ever been in a startup with Leone, he's like, he'll make a move. Oh, so if you're in a startup with
post trade on the block,
Leone's pretty respectful though. He doesn't there's some guys who will just then sit on the clock for 5 hours after trading up for the pick.
Horrible.
Leone will post in the group meet and he'll be like, I traded up for this. I'll sit for an hour. I'll send some trades out. I'll take some offers. But Leone is just always making the micro moves in a startup.
Oh man, the people who do that is rough. The worst to me, actually, I think this triggers me even more than the people who move up and sit on the clock is when someone takes a player and then is like, if anybody wants the guy I just took, send your offers. It's like you're saying it's like,
I got that guy's worse. That guy's
just funny.
Up to take the guy that I just took. It's like,
if the clock's moving again, you can send whatever dumb message you want. I hate I'm holding the room hostage until someone pays me more than what I just paid.
I would rather be held hostage than than give that person the satisfaction of us all being like, oh wow, you did get a steal on Bijan. I better load up the truck and send you an offer. It drives me nuts. I get so tilted by it.
You guys think Bijan could actually appreciate though? Like if he starts the season and Algier is just like not involved and Ritter looks competent, like could Bijan actually have just like immediately the legendary upside role? He's getting like 6 targets a game. He's getting every goal line carry. Like how possible is that? I haven't even really thought about it. Like I'm higher than Bijan in the market because I just feel like I'm always taking him in the first round of best ball. Feels like the room is just always just giving me Bijan. I don't know why that is, but like, could he be better than McCaffrey, even not considering age, just straight up be scoring more points than McCaffrey?
I don't even think you need that for him to appreciate a lot in value, because what you really need is the setup season where he looks good. He looks like a pass catcher. The Falcons throw a little bit more so that enough to support, like 3.5, maybe even 4 receptions to a running back a game. And they get quarterback like semi figured out. Either Ritter's better than we think, or they get a new veteran starter in. And then what you need on top of that, I think, for him to really appreciate in value is Breece Hall does not look the same coming off the ACL. The Colts are a disaster with this new rookie quarterback. McCaffrey looks like he's in decline. Gibbs isn't what we were hoping. He's more of a satellite back. Saquon continues to decline a little bit. Austin Eckler turns like 29, 30. I mean, at that point, like, he's the only viable running back. So I think that alone would cause him to move up.
Yeah, I think if you look at last year's startups, right? Jonathan Taylor, Jamar Chase, I almost said Jamar Jefferson, who I believe is like a 7th round pick of the Detroit Lions a couple years ago.
He's not on the roster anymore.
Jamar Chase and
Sean
Justin Jefferson. I also love Jamar Jefferson. Rest in peace. But Jonathan Taylor was going basically interchangeably with Chase and Jefferson last year in the first round of startups. And so to me, it seems fairly clear that if Bijan Robinson is to reach those same heights quite quickly, I don't really see why he wouldn't be able to assume that same kind of position. I feel like for as long as I've been playing Dynasty, which isn't super long, but every year people say like the market's never going to value running backs this highly again. Like they figured it out. We're done with running backs. And like, it's never been true. Like it's always true on like the macro level to some extent, where we're less interested in the individual running backs that we used to be very interested in. But then there's new, young, fresh running backs that immediately we get really, really interested in again. Like, so I just don't think that it's true that Bijan's ceiling is capped below those top wide receivers if he comes out and he's scoring 20 points per game. And I think it's very possible that he is. Like we've seen out of Saquon, we've seen out of Zeke. I mean, frankly, we've even seen, not to the same scoring level, but in terms of a workload level, we've seen it out of Najee Harris, where these recently, when teams are drafting these running backs the first round, they're getting loaded up. And to me, Bijan is obviously a clearly superior prospect to a Najee Harris, to a Leonard Fournette. Like I think that he has that upside to produce the efficiency to produce in all phases. Like I don't know, would anybody be shocked if he's the RB1 overall this year? I think it's like well within his range of outcomes.
No, I think he should be considered like plus 150 maybe to be the overall RB1. Like just transpose Tyler Algier's workload in an offense that's like 10% better, but Bijan is like 70% better than Tyler Algier. Like that's not even close to an outlandish scenario. He could lead the NFL in touches in an offense that is like pretty good at running the ball.
Yeah, I mean, I've been looking at some stuff, some of the NFL Next Gen stats, and Tyler Algier was good last year. He was good in rush yards over expected, which is a metric I really like over there. Uses the player tracking data, and he was good in success rate, which just is rush yards over expected. But did you achieve positive or did you achieve negative? Right? It's kind of caps big play and just looks at consistency. He was great in that metric too, but so was Caleb Huntley. So was Cordarrelle Patterson. This was an offense that was actually like very efficient at running the ball, even though teams knew they were going to run the ball. So I think you'll probably see efficient play out of Bijan. He wasn't elite. He was a truly elite prospect. So I think, whether or not he finishes at the RB1, I think he's a big favorite to be the RB1 off the board in 2024 redraft leagues.
I agree.
Right?
I agree.
That's
It's like how
that's an awesome way of putting it.
It's like how DeAndre Swift, like, kind of like he had some good games, he had some flashes and stuff, and people were just like falling all over themselves to draft him in the second round after he was like pretty good as a rookie. And I expect Bijan to be way better than that, mostly because I don't expect him to be feuding with his running back coach.
I mean, we'll talk about Gibbs in a second, but that's totally right. Like, people will do anything for these young running backs. Like, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But betting on running backs to accrue in value from year 1 to year 2 that are highly drafted, that have pedigree, is like one of the safest possible bets in Dynasty. Like, your Javonte Williams split in a backfield for an entire year with Melvin Gordon, and he was awarded the number 2 overall ADP in like February of that year. Miles Sanders was an extraordinarily in-demand asset coming off his rookie year. Josh Jacobs was sprinting to the top of the running back ranks off his rookie year, which proved wrong, and then it eventually proved right. But like, Kerryon Johnson was like an extraordinarily in-demand asset off his rookie year. Like, it's just, unless you, like, no offense to Pat, close your ears, but unless you Ronald Jones it as a rookie, like, you will be beloved by the Dynasty community entering year 2, most likely.
Hey, still beloved by some of us.
That's true. Maybe this is the question: is how, like, I think all of us clearly have Bijan RB1 overall. I think mostly in a tier of 1, but how, if you had Bijan Robinson and someone was to offer whoever you have at RB2 in your rankings, like, how much would you need? Would you need a full first round pick? Would you need a first round pick plus? How large is the gap between Bijan and the rest of the pack?
It's sort of like the issue is if you have Bijan on a team right now, that probably indicates your team was really shitty. Like, you just had the 101. So what is McCaffrey doing for you?
Let's say that you traded for Bijan.
Well, actually, I did this. Yeah. So actually, I'm in this scenario. I'm in a league where I traded up. I packaged up this was before the draft, from the 108 to the 101 with Leone. If I could get, so I have Bijan. If someone offered me McCaffrey and then they offered me, like, a wide receiver 3-ish type, like a guy who I could, count on points, but he's not a guy who's like really gonna appreciate. George Pickens, right? I think that's a good one, right? So they say McCaffrey and Pickens for Bijan. That if assuming I'm trying to score points this year and next year, I think that seems right.
Give me Bijan.
See, I think I'm taking Bijan there. Like, I think I want. So is that your RB2, Davis McCaffrey? Every time I try to guess these things, I screw up the sheet. So I feel like it's better to ask you directly. So that's your 2. And who's yours, Pat?
Brees.
I believe I also have Brees, and I also have Taylor ahead of McCaffrey. Is McCaffrey take just based on, like, you're already investing a lot in running backs, so just take the guy who scores the most, Davis?
He's going to score so many more points than these other guys over the next 2 seasons, right? I just think that's true. And maybe it's not. Maybe my prior is wrong, and we see McCaffrey slow down. We see him be in the timeshare with Elijah Mitchell, whatever, right? Like, those things are possible. And it's hard. I am more of I have a more pessimistic viewpoint of Brees Hall than both of you. This has come up many times.
That's true.
Where the knee injury, I just think the fact that I expect him to not be active, not playing for week 1 for the Jets, that just sort of in a more nebulous way, it just opens up problems. Now, is in a vast majority of the timelines, is Brees Hall going to be fine? Comes back in week 4, looks incredible, is ripping off, 19 fantasy points per game. Sure. But McCaffrey, I don't have to do any of that guesswork. He just is going to score a shit ton of fantasy points.
You do a little
because he's so old.
Because he's 27 years old. So when you head into 2024 drafts, if McCaffrey doesn't score a shitload of points this year, he's going to lose a lot of value because he's going to be 28 years old.
Right.
It's pretty simple, right? Like, he has to continue to crush.
You are right. Yeah.
So to me with Brees, like, yeah, it feels risky because he's coming off a torn ACL, but he's like, isn't he still 21 years old as we sit here today? I mean, he's really young. He just turned 22. Yeah. So he's really young. And, I think you can have it. It probably can't be quite as bad as like the Dobbins comeback, but if it's like Dobbins plus he's used more as a receiver, and at the end of the season he like looks like he's finally back, he's going to lose value from this for sure. But he's not. It's not going like he's going to crater. We're going to kind of talk ourselves back into.
He's definitely not going to go to zero.
Yeah, but I mean, he'd still be. I don't know. He'd be like in the 50s.
Well, it'd be like the Barkley situation from a couple years ago.
Right.
Like he was right. Like, and that's how I kind of felt about. I felt a lot different about Barkley when he was in his first year post ACL, in terms from a buying perspective, than I did Dobbins or Javonte. And I feel the same way about Brees, which is just with Barkley, like my level of confidence that he would once again become a highly thought of asset was very high. So I was like, I'm just going to buy now. If it dips further or whatever, I'm not going to sell him. I'll just buy now. And if he comes back strong off the ACL, great. If he dips and I eat a loss, it'll just be temporary. And then I'm just going to keep buying more. And then hopefully we'll get the payoff in 2 years, which we did last year. That's kind of how I feel about with Brees. Like, I don't know if this is going to be a great year for Brees Hall, but I'm not going to be interested in selling. Like, I just think he's so foundational. I'm just not worried about what happens around him. Whereas like for Javonte Williams, I have more concerns. And I think that the price difference is warranted in that, like, he has to, if he's bad this year, like if he has the Dobbins year this year, like then I would still be panicking all next offseason about like, are the Broncos going to bring in a free agent? Are they going to draft somebody? Like what's going to happen? Like maybe they bring in someone to supplement Brees Hall. I just think a healthy Brees Hall is such a transcendent talent that I just think he eventually will defeat all comers as long as he's able to get back to health at some point. And I mean, it would be really surprising if he's just dust for life, right? Like maybe he's not that good this year, but I think in 2024, like he's probably fine.
Yeah, it's a clean ACL tear. Like this is not the type of injury that, a super young player, it really derails the career. I mean, people talk about Adrian Peterson as kind of the prime example, which he is, but Jamal Charles also came back off an ACL tear. Like we do have, it can be a devastating injury. I'm not trying to completely dismiss it, but Hall has shown something that Javonte has not. Hall kind of flashed the, oh my God, this guy's like the next guy. And Javonte's always been a little bit of a projection, and it wasn't a clean ACL tear for Javonte, so I think he'll probably struggle a bit more this year. So I agree that the price difference is totally warranted.
And then where do well, I want to say this on McCaffrey, actually. I forgot to add this. Like, so we're doing these best ball drafts, right? Half PPR. Christian McCaffrey goes almost interchangeably with Cooper Kupp in terms of the top of the draft. And I understand that there's like wide receiver avalanche effects to that, where people are really worried about the scarcity of the position. It's notable to me that in PPR Dynasty, two guys that I think it's probably reasonable to say have a similar amount of years remaining in most scenarios, just when you consider the positional difference between them. Christian McCaffrey, 205 right now in Dynasty ADP, RB2. Cooper Kupp, 403, wide receiver 14. And I feel like your output from these guys over the rest of their career in terms of elite scorers is pretty similar. I struggle to invest in McCaffrey right now vis-a-vis some of the elite veteran wide receivers. So I feel like you're kind of getting a similar use case out of at a considerably lower opportunity cost.
I mean, I agree with that logic wholeheartedly. We did like 30 minutes on Cooper Kupp in our wide receiver episode, so we don't need to go super deep into it. But McCaffrey is no different in the sense of when you look at the bell curve looks nice, but the great likelihood is that Christian McCaffrey is going to be awesome, just going to be spitting out fantasy points, scoring touchdowns, catching passes, looking awesome in Shanahan's offense. And then one day he's going to get up and he's not going to feel quite right. And that's just going to be it. He's going to be sent off to the glue factory like every other running back that gets too old. Now you could certainly talk yourself into McCaffrey, his game's not based on speed and he's creative and you can use him as a pass. Like you could do that as mental gymnastics with yourself, but I don't.
What's that impression?
Like Dynasty guy?
Was this Dynasty guy?
That's Dynasty guy who's thinking about.
To me, that just kind of sounded like Pete doing a Davis impression.
For the audio listeners, Davis put on a red hat for that bit.
Yeah. Pete has made this point before, which is that when I'm doing an impression, really what I'm doing is just people doing. I'm doing an impression. Of me, yes, yeah.
Okay.
So that's what that was. I mean, maybe McCaffrey gets 8 extra games once he's out of juice because he can play on third downs or whatever. But it's not materially different than like.
I just think that's such a silly argument too. Not your argument, but the fake impression of you Dynasty guys, straw man argument is that like the whole point of McCaffrey is that he is like scoring way more than everybody else. So as soon as somebody then comes with their secondary argument and it's like, yeah, but when he's 29, he'll still get 15 points per game as a pass down special. It's like, okay, I don't care. Like I'm not drafting McCaffrey for the James White era of his career. Like I'm drafting McCaffrey for him scoring way more than everybody else. And like once that ceases to be true, then he becomes overpriced. So like I'm fine. Like I have no problem with investing in superstar talent. McCaffrey's obviously that. But I always just find that secondary argument about like McCaffrey, and I've seen it with Kamara too, that it's like, it's just less compelling to me because I don't feel like I want to invest in elite veterans for the possibility that they become high-end RB2s.
Yeah, I mean, Aaron Jones is past pick 100 in our rankings. And Aaron Jones, like, still has, a little bit left for sure. But
he scored a lot of points last year, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
And he's still great at football. Like, he's still a super efficient, awesome player.
Yep. But he is not Christian McCaffrey in terms of his workload. And that's how you lose a ton of value. Like, if I offered you, a late first on top of Aaron Jones to get Christian McCaffrey, you'd be like, no.
You'd be like, dude, get out of here.
Go away. Yeah. I don't even know that you would like send a counter. Like, it's just once the workload goes for McCaffrey, which it could go this season. He could be more of an Aaron Jones type of workload player this season. That's on the table. If that were to happen, he loses a ton of value. I don't think it's the most likely scenario. I think McCaffrey's probably going to score a ton of points this year, but you need him to. Oh,
for sure. Right. Aaron Jones is a great example. I mean, even at corollary at wide receiver, like you see Hopkins 8-12, Keenan Allen 906, Tyler Lockett goes in the 11th round. Like the veterans who score starter points are not well received by the Dynasty community. Like the only veterans that hold substantial value are the elites.
Yes.
I'm trying to trade for Lockett in like every league right now.
Yeah,
like just
I
trying
think he's
to
a great buy.
I'm just trying to find people who are like, who really love JSN, and like Lockett still, that's totally neither here nor there. So we haven't talked about Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
What do we think the basically it'll be a 4-year marriage between Jonathan Taylor and Anthony Richardson will look like? Does both the bear and the bull cases do for Jonathan Taylor's?
You don't want to let me live in the universe where the Colts don't re-sign him to a $50 million contract. I can't escape to that fantasy land. That's my personal dream as a Colts fan. I've just been dreading this reality. Like as soon as Jonathan Taylor was really, really good, I got really excited for about 2 weeks. And then I was like, oh my God, we're going to give him like $60 million. It's going to be horrible.
He's gonna get what Gettleman had set aside for Saquon Barkley. Like whatever Gettleman had earmarked for the Barkley extension, that's what Jonathan Taylor's gonna get.
The quick aside here, not that we need more tangents, but I'm gonna do it. Sean Siegel had a piece like dating back pre-Rotoviz. Like this is like he had a site, Always Money in the Banana Stand, or
Always
what was
Money
the
in the
exact?
Banana Stand.
Yeah. And so he wrote an article, it's like real life football. It was like saying that it's actually better because at the time all these teams are drafting running backs super high in the NFL draft. He was like, it's actually better if you miss completely on the pick because then you don't run the ball a ton and you don't have to pay a running back.
Yeah.
So hitting on a running back can be now Jonathan Taylor. No, around. I think you want to hit, but
Well, that's the problem. Is like I think I've tweeted this exactly before about Taylor. Is I said like there's no way to win on an early running back selection because like either you CH it and you just like spent high draft capital on a bad player at a position that doesn't really matter, or you hit on it in a massive way and then you wind up shelling out this massive contract and you end up running the ball too much and it's like there's no good scenario. It's a lose-lose. But for Dynasty, other than
it can work out. You draft them, they're great. They're just ripping off 2,000 yards, and then they suffer a catastrophic,
Oh my God.
unrecoverable knee injury.
Oh my
in year
God.
4. And then
This
they
is as
become
morbid as your ship chasing opening about the submarine.
what happens? I guess like if they Lawrence Maroney it or Willis McGahee, he was the one who had like the unbelievable knee injury. Then you're
that was
under,
in college. He came back from that. God, I
Yeah,
still
but
remember.
that-
I
but
remember
you can
seeing
be
that
like-
live. That was nuts.
it was nuts. So, but you can just be like, sorry, dude, we can't pick up your 5th-year option. And best we can do is the James Robinson 2 years, $8 million, no dollars guaranteed contract.
So you're saying Barkley missed it by a year. If he had tore his ACL like a year later, then the Giants would be in the driver's
Well, no,
seat.
Barkley just ran bad. Barkley just ran bad by Gettleman getting fired. I mean, dude, you know that dude
Tough
was
break for
punching air when he saw that tweet. He was like, the New York John Mara just stole my livelihood. Like my money just got taken out of my great grandchildren's
Like for real.
mouth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. That's
Hate that
about
for
3
him.
different tangents. Jonathan Taylor's dynasty value. Thoughts?
Can I make the bull case?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. I mean, he was because I'm actually the highest on Taylor by one
Are you?
pick. I have him
Oh,
at 17.
one pick.
Jacob has him at 18. Davis at 28. So maybe Davis should make the bear case.
Wow. Yeah.
The thing with Jonathan Taylor is that like he can be a receiver. He had the same college yards per out run as Saquon Barkley. Now he kind of does it in more of like a Derrick Henry-y way, but he can get upfield quickly. He's not lumbering. He's explosive. So you can use him in the passing game. However, he is ultimately an elite breakaway runner. That's like what he does. And he's shown no real signs of, not being that guy. 2 years ago, he was off the charts. He's still very young. He's 24 years old. He's now entering a situation where the mobile quarterback, and a huge mobile quarterback at that, is going to draw defensive attention. So he should, like many other running backs before him, benefit on the ground from that dynamic. He also has a coach who I think fully understands how to get an efficient running game from a mobile quarterback, given what we just saw at the Eagles. So it plays to his strengths. Is it going to kind of limit his overall profile a bit? Yeah, it's definitely going to limit his receiving. But that's not really why we were drafting Taylor. It's always got to be, the hope is now that he can be more of kind of a Dalvin Cook, where he gets a little bit of usage in the receiving game, but isn't kind of getting there as a receiver. The worry is more that he's like a Nick Chubb or, a Derrick Henry, where it's all rushing work. That's definitely a concern. But I think if you look at, even his numbers from last year, still had a really strong success rate. But if he can get back to the explosive running plays that he had as a total workhorse on the ground, which I think he is a pretty big favorite to be, then I think we'll be able to overlook kind of the receiving red flag. It definitely hurts his ability to like become the RB1 overall in Dynasty, but I think he's got like a potential 2-year run as being like the RB like 2 to 3 mix.
Yeah, and I would also add too, I think that there is, maybe it's just a total coincidence, but I think that there's been a idea that we just kind of talked about with McCaffrey, that like the receiving running backs are the running backs that age the best. And
tell that to Derrick Henry, bro.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I think it's like, that seems to be like the public sentiment. And I'm not going to say that it actually is the opposite in a predictable way, but that definitely hasn't been true. Like, Nick Chubb seems to be aging phenomenally, and Derrick Henry has aged incredibly. Adrian Peterson,
and Nick Chubb had a terrible knee injury in college and is still aging really well.
And like probably the best aging running back of like our mini generation is Adrian Peterson, who is like still an effective running back, like into his 30s. Like, we even had DeMarco Murray had a renaissance season as quite an old running back with Tennessee Titans. Like, to me, like the elite rushers, at least in recent times, have actually sustained.
The answer is that it's just random.
Level.
The answer is that it's guys whose bodies hold up and who take care of themselves. It doesn't have anything to do with play style. It's just sort of luck and.
But maybe the guys whose bodies hold up happen to be the 230-pound guys.
That's a good point. I mean, that's a good point. My critique of Karane's argument would be that the two guys he just brought up, to give a profile of this working out is Miles Sanders and Dalvin Cook, who at no point I've never been excited to own either of those guys. And I agree with everything about Taylor. Breakaway runs. He is, I think we sort of lost sight with this because the Colts were just a fucking tire fire to watch last year. He is like a singular talent. It's not in the same way that, Jamal Charles or Christian McCaffrey or these guys is, but he is like an incredible player. The concern you would have would basically be, one, how many touchdowns does he lose with Anthony Richardson? And the real bear case would be Anthony Richardson is dog shit, and he just continues to play for these dog shit teams that don't score any points and give him fewer opportunities.
They got to ban the tush push because that's probably coming to Indy too.
Well, I think it's still
right. Like
Steichen,
Steichen comes over from Philly, right? Like they're probably.
Oh my God, shit. I hadn't even put that together yet. This could be a disaster that could be so bad for Jonathan Taylor if Anthony Richardson is scoring every 2-yard touchdown.
Because I don't see why they wouldn't do that, right? Like, I mean, he was the play caller for Philly.
Yes.
For all we know, he came up with the idea. They now have a very large quarterback. Like, I got to think that he's getting a lot of 1-yard tush push sneaks, which is like an immediate term problem.
Oh, he was with the Chargers for a long time before, so I'm gonna guess he didn't come up with the idea. Well, actually, Rivers was so good. Rivers was so good at the 1-yard quarterback sneaks. You guys, he was really, really good at that. He was Brady-esque at the quarterback sneak. Damn.
Maybe I also have a ton of Anthony Richardson in various formats. So this
there you go.
I'm maintaining.
It'll be a win-win for you.
Let me defend Dalvin Cook slightly here. The reason I brought him up, he did have 24 PPR points per game in 2020, and he did so with just over 3 receptions per game.
Because he just scored a bazillion long touchdowns that year, right?
Exactly. Yeah, he had 16 touchdowns on the ground, only 1 through the air. Almost 1,600 rushing yards, averaged 5 yards a carry. I mean, it is much more rare that we see kind of the legendary running back season from a guy who isn't a strong receiver these days, but it can happen in the modern NFL. Dalvin Cook would probably be your prototype for Jonathan Taylor, the hope that, he's still catching like 3 balls a game. He's not going to get to 5. It's never going to happen. But he doesn't necessarily just have to be like Nick Chubb, where he's catching like less than 2.
Well, and allow me to defend Derrick Henry, Derrick Henry has 4 consecutive seasons above 19 PPR points per game. Like, that's maybe not legendary upside, but it's pretty damn good. Like, Derrick Henry has been a highly effective fantasy running back while catching
2 years ago,
a lot of balls.
He was about to shove it down my throat 2 years ago because he would have had a legendary season if he hadn't gotten hurt. I think he was absolutely crushing in PPR. I mean, he had 23.4 points per game in PPR. As a 2-down running back, he only had 18 receptions in 8 games.
And here's my further to that is that he was a top 3 running back for 2 consecutive seasons between 2020 and 2021. And Ryan Tannehill scored 14 rushing touchdowns during that period of time. So he was doing that despite Ryan Tannehill taking a lot of goal line work. Obviously wasn't scrambling as much between the 20s. I think Nick Chubb could have been in that Derrick Henry sphere of scoring if he actually monopolized all the rushing work. Part of the issue with Nick Chubb is that he doesn't really get the receiving work, but he's also never actually monopolized the work on the ground. Like, Kareem Hunt has always taken a portion of the carries. And then really importantly, Kareem Hunt takes goal line carries from him, or he did. There would be times where Nick Chubb would sub out inside the 10. There'd be times where it was just Hunt's drive and he would stay on the field inside the 10. Like, those things won't be concerns for Taylor. I think he would be my bet to lead the NFL in snap share this year among all running backs. Like, their backfield depth chart behind him, despite Taylor coming off an injury, their projected RB2 is Zach Moss, who is certainly not a threat on passing downs. They drafted Evan Hall, who is a satellite guy. The most recent beat reporters suggest that he won't make the team.
Really?
So I don't know that he's
Windhorse means.
Who knows if that actually happens? But it means he's probably not having the world's greatest camp, right? Like, Jake Funk was playing over him with the first team offense in camp, so that's not a great sign. Like, I just think Taylor is probably playing every 2-minute drill. I think he's playing a lot of third downs, and he's certainly playing every single goal line series.
Does Jim Irsay have Ezekiel Elliott's phone number?
I don't think that Ezekiel Elliott's coming to the Indianapolis Colts. Chris Ballard does not sign like dusty veterans. Like Chris Ballard, like
he signed
Chris
Phillip
Ballard
Lindsay. He signed Phillip Lindsay last year.
Yeah, but then he cut him.
Good for him.
Chris Ballard has the longest running streak in the NFL of every draft class that he's been a part of since joining the Colts. They've had a UDFA make the 53-man roster. And it's like something that he takes a lot of pride in, where like he wants his young players to have chances to succeed.
Yeah,
like, he doesn't sign these veterans. He doesn't.
They always have.
It's interesting.
An Ashton Dulin, a Mike Strachan, Deontay Harris. Like they always have some UDFA wide receiver that's really interesting in a Rotovizian sort of way.
Yeah.
When I got an Austin Dulin in my first NFL all-day pack, I knew it wasn't going to work.
Well, especially since you just called him Austin Dulin.
Yeah, bro, come on.
How dare you offend Ashton Dulin that way?
Sorry,
Who was that wide receiver from Clemson that the Colts had that people got really excited about for 2 years in a row, like 3 years ago? We're going down a tangent.
Are you talking about Derrick Rogers?
No.
He was Tennessee anyway.
Clemson Colts wide receiver. He was a round 6 pick that people got so fired up about. Deion Kane, that's the guy. People got really.
Oh, people did get big excited about him.
Yeah. But no, that point is, I just think Taylor, like, that's another thing with Taylor is he's always had to split with Hines for his whole career, and it's always been an annoying thing where Hines plays in like certain goal line sub packages. He always plays in the 2-minute drill, plays on some third downs. Like, Hines is gone, and I don't know if Hall is going to take that role. And again, like, it would be great for Taylor if Zach Moss is actually the RB2, right? Like that Zach Moss is not taking pass downs. Like he's just there to take 5 carries when Taylor needs a Gatorade. Other guy in this tier is Jahmyr Gibbs for the market. I'm certainly a Jahmyr Gibbs optimist. What are your guys' thoughts on what he gives you this year, and then what you think the dynasty market would react to that if your median projection comes true?
Yeah, I'm lower on. I think the other thing is I'm also just lower on all these running backs than you guys. Like I just moved running backs down because they were running backs. That's sort of based on personal experience of trying to trade away running backs in a lot of these leagues we're playing in. I'm definitely, of the three of us, the Gibbs bear, which is sort of funny because I actually really like him in best ball this year because he gets a dome game and has a good correlation in week 17, and he's in kind of a dead spot of the draft for wide receivers. So it's one of those things where, like, in the context of best ball this year, I'm gonna have a lot of him, but I don't love the idea of spending a pretty premium asset, whether it be pick, whether it be trade, on a smaller side running back. David Montgomery's on the roster. The coaching staff in Detroit has shown basically an extreme, you could frame it either way. You could say an extreme focus on segmenting roles in the backfield, or an extreme unwillingness to create a workhorse of any variety, because Jamal Williams actually in his time in Green Bay was like pretty fine on passing downs, pretty fine catching passes, pretty fine pass blocking. And the Lions coaching staff was like, if you even think about running a route, we are going to send you to the shadow realm. We are bringing in Justin Jackson. We are bringing in Craig Reynolds, who I think is like 29 and an undrafted free agent who's been a career special teamer. And they were like, we're putting this guy out for 10 snaps a game instead of playing Jamal Williams or DeAndre Swift on passing downs. There were games where Craig Reynolds was playing over Swift on passing downs.
Yeah.
So Justin Jackson was always playing those snaps.
Yes, always playing. Right. So the thought, my take is basically like, I think Gibbs is pretty good. I think he's going to have some crazy spike weeks, or at least I'm hoping he does. And he'll be benefited by playing the Lions schedule. I think they have 11 dome games this year. So I think he could maybe even appreciate, but I don't foresee in the immediate future anything representing Crane's like legendary upside role for him. I just don't think he would get the required touches.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he will either. I think it's possible in a year, but he needs things to break his way. He needs David Montgomery to be completely dust. But even then, you're talking about like him displacing Montgomery in 2024, probably.
You know what I'm worried about? I'm worried that he's 10 pounds smaller Tony Pollard.
Yeah, I mean, that could be
Yeah.
But I would say Pollard isn't quite as much of the receiving back as he sometimes gets painted at. He's a efficient receiver,
Pollard.
but he's not like Pollard is more like mini, Travis Etienne or something.
Pollard, I think, is a misunderstood player. Like I think the closest comparison to Pollard to me is Aaron Jones, where he's like a good receiver, but he's also just like a really good runner. Like more explosive.
That's a good comp.
But I also think Pollard is like, I think he's a better receiver than his receiving stats show because he's such a bad pass blocker. Like he's a good receiver per route. And like, if you watch him, like he runs good routes. It's just that he's never had a particularly high route percentage because they've prioritized playing Zeke on passing downs. Whereas like,
is he even a bad pass blocker, or is Zeke just that good at it?
No, I think Pollard's pretty bad. Well, both I think are true. But
I called him a pass blocking specialist after the Cowboys 2020. It was in the headline of a Roto blurb, and after they lost in the 2021 playoffs, people were not happy. But guess what? He was. Deal with it.
Yeah, no, he is. I mean, like I think Pollard struggles in pass protection. Like I'm a Pollard stan. I don't need to like defend his pass blocking skills. But I think that it was also a difference where like they had a trade-off, right? It was like we have a really good pass blocker or we have a good receiver. Like, what do we think is more important? Whereas if now, like who's not a pass blocking specialist? Ronald Jones.
Ronald Jones.
Right? Like if
who is also not a pass blocking specialist? 172 pound Deuce Vaughn.
Yeah.
Malik Davis might be.
Like I doubt that.
Yeah.
Like he's like 200 pounds.
Yeah, he probably isn't.
Do they have a fullback on the roster?
Yeah, and it's named.
They might sign
Lupke,
Zeke,
and he's getting hyped a lot in camp. Yeah, Hunter Lupke is getting some steam.
Wait, hold on. Let me look at their.
My Zeke slander didn't no bites on that.
No, they probably it was good. It was.
I don't want to. Yeah, no,
I have to stop. I have to stop entertaining this because I'm so all in on Pollard. Like I can't entertain.
Yeah,
Zeke returning.
But I think it's fine. Like I guess we've transitioned from Jahmyr Gibbs, but into Tony Pollard. But I think that Pollard's price now, like in best ball and in Dynasty, honestly, but like especially in best ball, and frankly, if you're drafting him in Dynasty, you're drafting him based on what he's going to do this year. So I think that they're pretty intertwined. Like I think price currently is totally fine if Zeke signs with the Cowboys. And I'm curious, like
I agree.
Where does Pollard end up if they just don't sign anyone? Because why isn't he a first round pick? Like
that's the thing, is if no one gets signed, the market has been wrong all offseason. He should go where Bijan goes. Maybe you could argue ahead.
Because the way I've been playing it with Pollard is like I'm drafting him in every standalone tournament that I do. I'm drafting him well over 30%. Because I don't have to worry about the closing line value. And I just think this price is fine, even if Zeke signs. And then in Best Ball Mania, I'm trying to keep it around like 15 or so, because I get that his ADP probably goes down if they sign somebody. But like if they just don't sign anyone, I feel like he ends the year at the 1-2 turn. Like he's just like,
yeah.
I mean, he was RB7 last year, and he was the 16th highest scoring non-quarterback with Zeke on the roster. And with Pollard not actually being the lead back to the second half of the year, now Zeke's not on the roster. He's being drafted as the RB7 and the 21st highest non-quarterback.
I think that the issue you have with Pollard, to some extent, is that the Cowboys are probably going to score less points. I mean, McCarthy's just stated that as a goal. That they're going to score less points.
He's literally said less of that. We Kellen Moore. Yeah. Get the fuck out, bro.
But does that hurt Pollard? Like, doesn't that just mean that he's gonna be more Pollard?
No. I think that in a very perverse way, sort of in actually a Bijan Falcons way, where just if they're building the whole ship out of 3 yards and a cloud of dust plays or whatever, like it's bad. It's really bad for CD. It's really bad for Cooks and Gallup. Like there's no extra meat left on the bone for those guys. But it whatever they lose in efficiency and touchdown opportunities, he might just gain by raw touches.
I think that's a floor argument, though. And I certainly would prefer an explosive offense where he can get there on explosive plays and touch the ball less, right? I mean, this is like one of the things that, we tend to disagree with the market on sometimes with running backs. Is like, I don't really want the guy to have to take on as many touches as humanly possible, because that's how injuries occur. I would much prefer that he can get there on a somewhat limited role, but just be absolutely explosive. And that perfectly suits Tony Pollard's profile. But if they're scoring a lot less points, then it could hurt, and they're going to run a lot fewer plays. So
yes, that is the big issue.
True. So I think there's the other thing with Pollard in best ball specifically is that in these drafts, I'm at like 15% since the NFL draft, and I was at like 30% pre-NFL draft. So largely I agree, but you do have this issue of like, if I take Pollard in the second, am I then taking another running back in the third, which I probably am because that's where the value is there. And then I don't necessarily like, I'm kind of putting myself at the mercy of this room. Are they going to bury me? You have
to take Detroit Lions, Kadarius Toney on Pollard teams just to give you like a lot of the time.
I refuse.
I only ever take Jameson Williams when I already have two guys from that game.
I just don't take Jameson Williams in best ball tournaments.
Are we out? Are we out on Jameson Williams? I'm pretty close to just being.
I just don't understand. I just don't understand the point of taking a player that we. This is now a best ball podcast, I suppose.
With one NFL, with a player.
I just don't know why I would take a player that is probably bad that is also going to miss 6 games. Like I don't know. It just seems like such a thin play to me. But
they hit it. That one reception was really good last year. Let me make 2 points here back on the running backs we're talking about.
Thank you.
First on Pollard, I do think so. I'm not the lowest on Pollard. I'm tied with Jacob, I think, and we don't have a ton of like a huge disparity here. No, I'm tied with Davis. We both have him at 50. Jacob, you're the highest.
If I'm not the highest, I'd be sad. Okay, yeah, he's of course I'm the highest.
I do think just like. It's a guy on the franchise tag. He's 26 years old. There's no team commitment after this year. There is a fairly low floor here. Like if he isn't efficient this year, or if they were just like, we gave him the shot to be the complete back and he isn't that guy. And then they draft someone. I mean, the Cowboys drafting a running back feels like it should be like, I don't know, minus 150. You know what I mean?
But he's not a Dallas Cowboy when they're drafting their running back.
Well, they could. I mean, they could sign him to like a 1-year deal or 2-year deal after a disappointing season, and then or maybe he goes somewhere else. But this is actually a like extremely high leverage year for Tony Pollard in terms of his dynasty value. Like he has to deliver this year, or you're losing a lot of value.
I've got
for sure you're using a lot of value. I just think like with Pollard, I mean, I think he is going to score a similar amount of points to Austin Eckler and Saquon Barkley, who are also, I think, extraordinarily precarious after this year. But Pollard's opportunity cost is lower than those guys. And I mean, Pollard's going the 5th round. He's going against really, when you're looking where Pollard goes, like you're really looking at players that either have elite short-term ceilings and age concerns, or you're looking at players who just probably aren't going to score a lot of points. If Tony Pollard is a top 5 running back this year and does nothing for me ever again, like I'm honestly okay spending a 5th round pick on that. That has like, I have no concerns about that. I don't think that he'll be nothing ever again, but I think that that's fine.
If I had good teams, I would be trading 2024 like late first for him. I think like if I had a team like we talked about this with Devontae Adams last week. Like if I had a team that was like a 3 or a 4 seed, and I really wanted to supercharge its ceiling, and I had good wide receivers. Don't need to send a pick for Kelsey or whatever, but like because it's dynasty, maybe my running back room is thin. Maybe my running back 2 is like Bijan Robinson or something, but the rest of the team is good because you have outs, right? I mean, like obviously where these things are all a balance of probability. I think you've got like way fewer outs with some of these other guys, but Pollard has outs. I mean, Pollard could be phenomenal. He could earn himself a long-term contract. He could sign the Cowboys could be like, thank you for your service. We just whatever. And he signs a good contract with whoever, the Dolphins, the Commanders, whatever. It doesn't matter. Cause he's not like, I don't think he's close to done. I do think that him versus Rhamondre is fascinating. I've got them like basically back to back. I just think I might even have Rhamondre higher. Because Rhamondre was a good prospect who had some discipline stuff, which is why he ended up not being valued by the NFL, has done nothing but crush it in the NFL. Yeah. Like has done nothing but crush it. He's
even
played
in the
on every down.
The first year.
He's done, and he's played in every situation, right? He's been a pass blocker. He's played the James White role. He's been the goal line back. He's played, I think he's got 2 games with literally 100% of the snaps or something close to it. Like he's done everything that's been asked. But just by mere fact of being a New England Patriot, there's like a 10% discount on all of his production, right? Like it's just like he's a Patriot. Like people in their mind, they see that NEP next to a player and they're like, he's LeGarrette Blount. It's so funny.
Well, let's talk about this tier, and you can talk about Rhamondre. I just want to outline for people listening along. So we talk about that top 5. There's Barkley and Eckler, but really it's this sort of next tier that you can kind of take your pick. So there's Kenneth Walker, Travis Etienne, Josh Jacobs, Najee Harris, Rhamondre Stevenson, Nick Chubb, and Tony Pollard. So we can talk about Rhamondre, but I think that's the spot where you can take your favorite. Pat, if you want to get a point on Rhamondre, or who's your preferred of that group, and is it Rhamondre or Pollard?
I have Pollard at the top of the group, but I guess what I would just say is like I think all of these guys are win now pieces.
Yeah,
like that, and that's really my point with the Pollard stuff is that he's not insulated. He's 26 years old, but he is not insulated at all. So to me, like with running back, like a larger point, your point of, look, I can get Tony Pollard. He's going exactly where Saquon goes in redraft. And he's just, both of them are kind of equally uninsulated. I'd rather have Pollard, for the price. I think that makes a lot of sense, but it actually makes me want to lower Pollard or sorry, lower Barkley. It makes me want to lower
I agree
Barkley
with that. I think
ranks.
Barkley's price is pretty egregious. Like he's going at 306 right next to Jahmyr Gibbs, like ahead of a lot of the wide receivers we talked about yesterday, like T. Higgins, Devonta Smith. Like I think that's a tough price to pay for a player who got like 100% of the workload and had 17 points per game last year.
Yeah. So it's more of like, would I send a late first for Pollard on like a team where I think I have a chance? Like, yeah, I would do that. I think that's like a totally reasonable thing to do. But it's the type of thing where like, if you're in a startup and you're like, oh, I'm adding a young running back to this room. No, you're not. You're adding a guy who's on the franchise tag. So the bottom could fall out halfway through this season. Like, can this guy... One thing I like to think through, and this is especially important at running back, where the value is really, really dependent on current performance. Can this guy sustain a major injury and still have value? And most of these guys cannot. Rhamondre probably can, right? Like, I actually think maybe like Rhamondre and Etienne probably can sustain a major injury because they'll come back on a rookie deal, right? They'll come back to the same team on a rookie deal, which is helpful for their value in 2024 off the major injury.
But some collegiate lacrosse player would have already replaced Rhamondre for the Patriots is the issue.
I think Etienne and Rhamondre have a chance.
They won't hold their
I think they have a chance. I think they have a chance to recover their value.
Right, that's better.
But they're gonna nosedive.
They're not gonna crater. Whereas like Pollard, we sometimes forget like just how many guys like are like wiped from our brains. In Dynasty, that's like one of the tricks is that you forget like. Like Isaiah Crowell was like highly thought of, and then he like tore his Achilles and like never played again. Like,
dude, are we gonna start playing Name That Guy?
You really can.
I would love to play some Name That Guy at running back.
Philip Lindsay, right? Like Philip Lindsay had his moment, and then whoop. I mean, I'm not saying Pollard is this guy's, but it happens, man. And like, if you don't
are you intimating that Tony Pollard is Ben Tate, and that when he finally gets his job on the open market, he's gonna fall on his face?
I mean, we compared, I think last year, entering 2022, maybe we compared him to Ben Tate. We're like, is he gonna get the Ben Tate treatment? Thankfully, he's not. He's actually didn't have to go somewhere else. He took over the backfield.
Yeah, he lucked out.
Yeah, he lucked out. But I mean, it could go away very quickly. Like it really goes fast for even running backs that we think are super talented. I mean, and 26, by the way, is not like young for a running back. It's already on the borderline for, the legendary upside analysis I looked at. Like, we really want guys who are 25 and younger for those truly elite seasons. He's like already on like the downside of his career because of the way that he got wasted by the Cowboys. Like,
I'll never.
I mean, it sucks, but I think I would just, just be aware that basically everyone we're about to talk about is like a win now piece. Like I think Etienne's a win now piece because what happens if Bigsby eats in his workload, like values like crushed, compared to this price.
For sure. But here's my pushback that's pro Pollard. And I would apply a lot of this to Rhamondre too. I have no pushback on Pollard's floor being nothing. Like I think for sure, if they sign Dalvin Cook tomorrow and they decide in week 1 to give Dalvin Cook 55% of the snaps, Pollard becomes worth a second-round rookie pick. If Tony Pollard, breaks his leg, whatever, like it would be total dust. I guess like my pushback is, if you want to say I'm not investing in any running backs after like Bijan and Hall and Taylor and Gibbs, and then whatever guys you can get in round 12 and later, I think that's a totally defensible position. Like if you're just like, there's like 3 or 4 guys who I think are insulated, I'm going to take them, and then I'm not taking any of the other guys. I'm just going to stack a bunch of late ones. I think that's like a totally fine way to play. But to me, if you're going to dabble anyone in the middle ground, I just think you're fooling yourself if you're trying to talk yourself into this guy being more insulated or this guy being more insulated. Like I don't really care about the youth for these guys, because the young running backs who are actually insulated get drafted in round 2. Right. Like Kenneth Walker and Travis Etienne are not insulated. Like how many young running backs have we
I
seen
want to buy on Kenneth Walker so bad.
Oh, you can buy on him. Look, I'm not saying that he can't hit. I'm just saying he's not insulated. Like we have seen so many young running backs who flash early and then circumstances start to go wrong, and all of a sudden they're not. Like Antonio Gibson was not insulated. Cam Akers was not insulated. Miles Sanders was not insulated. Like none of these guys are, right? It doesn't have to mean that it goes badly, but the downside risk for Kenneth Walker and Travis Etienne is immense. Their teams just spent day 2 picks on them. I think they're both super talented, but they're definitely imperfect. And you need to have a really high threshold of volume to be an extraordinarily worthwhile investment as a fantasy running back. If Kenneth Walker's in a 50-50 split with Zach Charbonnet, or if Travis Etienne is coming off the field on every long down and distance and ceding 30% of the carries to Tank Bigsby, that's it. You're just Antonio Gibson at that point. So to me, it's like if I'm investing in a running back, I'm not worried about the floor because I don't think it really exists. I just want to get the guy who scores the most points. And Tony Pollard and Rhamondre Stevenson are going at the 2-3 turn, I think fairly. And Travis Etienne is going in round 4 and Kenneth Walker is going in round 5. And I think that's fair. So I'm just going to take the guys who I think are going to score more points if I'm taking a running back at all, or else I'll take, Quentin Johnston.
Yeah. I brought up the Etienne insulated value, just kind of underline that, like even compared to an Etienne, I think Pollard probably is less insulated, but I do have Pollard ahead of Etienne and Rhamondre. So I think that's the right way to approach it. I just think like if you're picking Pollard, like know what you're doing. Just know that you're not, it doesn't matter that he's 26 because the contract is the more important thing here. But I think you'll agree with this point, Jacob, because you have, you don't. Davis does. Davis has Nick Chubb above Tony Pollard, and I have Nick Chubb 1 spot behind Tony Pollard. And that's kind of my point, is that they're going right next to each other in redraft. I think in best ball, Chubb is going ahead of Pollard now. And it's like the same thing. You're betting on like you're hoping for one really good year out of this running back, and there's really no floor that comes along. Now, Chubb is older; he's 27.5, but that's not really the concern at this point because Pollard's so dependent on this year making the rest of his career that he might it doesn't matter how old he is because he's not super young.
Admittedly, like I'm just IKBing this with Pollard and Chubb. Like I understand that the market is drafting Nick Chubb ahead of Tony Pollard in best ball leagues, and I just think that the market is incorrect. Like that's really all it is. Like I just think that. So like
I could be convinced to like if I really sat down and did this, I could be convinced. I think to rank Tony Pollard as high as running back 5. I could probably move him up 20 spots in my rankings if I really thought about it. Like I feel like maybe what's keeping him down is like the range is pretty wide. Like I don't know, is it how possible do you guys think it is that Tony Pollard rips off like a 2-year stretch of basically being Christian McCaffrey? I like think it's possible. honestly.
Yeah, I just think it's in the range of
It's
outcomes.
more like
This is
Jamal
where I come
Charles
down
in terms of style, but
yeah, sure, right.
I just mean in terms of
this
points.
is just like I just think that Pollard has, and you know, you guys could disagree. Certainly, it seems like Davis does not. I think it's well within Tony Pollard's range of outcomes to contend for RB1 overall. And I just feel like we've seen Nick Chubb's entire career, and he doesn't do that. Like, so I think Nick Chubb, like, is probably going to score more points than Travis Etienne and Ken Walker. Maybe even scores more points than Tony Pollard. But, like, I don't know. Nick Chubb just feels like we're kind of like half, like, it just feels like a middle play where it's like, okay, like, he's probably more secure from a redraft projection standpoint than a lot of these younger running backs. But, like, again, if I'm taking a bet on the older player, like, I just want to tell myself a story of how they score 20 points per game. I really struggle to tell myself a story of how Nick Chubb ever scores 20 points per game. Whereas
I actually think I
can
am going to move. I'm going to move Pollard up quite a bit in my rankings.
I think I'm going to do that as well.
Partly because, like, you know, the point I'm making, right, is that he's no different than any of these other guys in terms of what you can get for this year. But then when I do think through, like, who actually has the legendary upside type of seasons, he's pretty high on the list. So if you're just playing, you're making a 1-year play. It's a redraft type of play. But I like the play with Pollard. I like betting on him more this year than I like Saquon Barkley. So why is Saquon Barkley ahead of him in my ranks? He shouldn't be, right? But because they are just 1-year plays.
I'm also realizing I am insanely high on Kenneth Walker. And when I did my rankings,
Let's talk about him.
It felt right to me where I put him. Because, like, I do like him more than Jahmyr Gibbs. Like, he's got a profile I'm interested in buying, which is, like, he's got that insane sort of not the same style. He doesn't accomplish it in the same way, but that Jamal Charles thing where it looks like the play is completely dead, and then all of a sudden he's just like, you blink your eyes and he's in the end zone. I also really liked him as a prospect. Like, that was a prospect profile I was pretty interested in. The big question we had for him as a rookie was, like, would he be able to provide anything in the passing game? I mean, 35 targets, that would be, I believe, the third highest of Derrick Henry's career, maybe even the second highest. He did that as a 22-year-old rookie in, like, a
horrendous yards per route run, for what it's worth. But
well, okay. So that is the subtext of everything I'm saying, which is what am I not saying? Which is that his raw numbers look pretty good, but if you break it down by per touch, he looks like Dearness Johnson, right? Horrible success rate, horrible yards per route run, not even a particularly good yards per target. It's really it's just a lot of touchdowns, right? It's a lot of touchdowns. And my supposition would be that as a player who, was in a weird environment in college, right? So he was one of these guys who took advantage of the transfer things. Yeah. His final season at Michigan State, the entire offense was built out of just giving him the ball in 8-man boxes and letting him go. My guess would be it's easier to teach a guy some of the intricacies of the position, helping him improve in pass running and stuff like that, than it is to teach someone to score 80-yard touchdowns. Now, all of that being said, I'm probably just wrong, and I need to move him down probably about 10 spots in the overall, just because Charbonnet could just be a literal permanent thorn in his side.
Yeah. I think they're probably, maybe not that into teaching in Seattle because they just drafted Zach Charbonnet. Yeah. Right. So they're like, instead of teaching this guy how to do all this intricate stuff, let's just draft a guy who's, like, very solid at that. Let's draft our next Chris Carson.
Best case scenario for Kenneth Walker probably is he becomes Nick Chubb to Zach Charbonnet's Kareem Hunt.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is, I think, totally plausible. Like, I don't know. I don't want to, like, litigate the Kenneth Walker talent debate because I think that both sides are correct. I think that. We can litigate a little bit. Like, I guess I'm just tired of litigating the Kenneth Walker talent debate because, like, I don't know. I've been doing this, like, since he came out as a rookie. Like, I was not a big fan of him as a prospect, and, like, I guess I feel like I feel as though, like, I got the evaluation of Kenneth Walker mostly right, which was that I thought he was, like, an excellent tackle breaker, was very explosive, was not quite as completive as a runner as people thought, and sucks as a pass catcher. And then I've he like caught 6 balls in London one time, and everybody was like, "You told me you didn't have hands." And it like, still aggravated me clearly. But I just think like he's clearly talented. Like he brings a lot to a backfield. I don't think that's debatable. I guess the question is like, if he's going to produce enough value to pay off what is currently a ADP in the 4th round of dynasty drafts, he either needs to get every single carry, including every single goal line carry, or he needs to get a decent portion of the pass down work. And I don't know that his profile said that he should get either of those. And then drafting Zach Charbonnet says that he probably won't get either of those. And for that reason, I'm out. Like that's just sort of where I'm at with it.
I think his price is ridiculous. So I have him at 61 in our rankings. Davis has him at 30. So we have a real.
I'm gonna move him.
Smokes.
I'm too
30.
high, but
I'm at 55.
I will.
I'm within range of you, Pat.
I'm still going to be much higher on him than
fair.
you guys. I'm going to move him down. I'm going to move him down some, but I'm not going to move him down in line with you guys. I still just think
you're also a lot higher than us on Etienne, which is, I think, in some ways a similar bet to Kenneth Walker. So.
Yeah, I think
Etienne might be like a lot more talented than Kenneth Walker.
I agree with that.
In theory, Etienne is like the ultimate in theory guy. Like if he could learn to catch, passes and stuff. But like, so for example,
he just does it with his chest.
Etienne is the world's most misunderstood running back. Like every single person who has commented on Travis Etienne has been like wrong about Travis Etienne in some respect to this point in his career. Like
it's because everyone remembers him like catching swing passes 6 years ago from Trevor Lawrence when they were in college together, and that's just like
isn't he Dalvin Cook? Isn't he just Dalvin Cook?
Yeah.
Yeah, like it's just right. I think that's mostly right. It's weird because like the data people were like he's a complete workhorse, and then there was like a film component that really didn't like him, that thought he was like not as good of a pass catcher, but it was always kind of assumed that he was like not a very consistent or a good rusher. And
he's
I think
really
like the film people have been like pretty right about the pass catching. Like he's clearly not like a dynamic pass catching threat. He's more of a swing pass, screen pass, hope he doesn't drop it guy. But like the idea of him as a rusher is dead wrong. Like he's actually a super consistent runner. He's like a really good runner. He's a good high volume runner. He's efficient carry to carry. He's an efficient breakaway guy. So yeah, it's strange. He's an extraordinarily underrated rusher, I think. And it's weird that people say that Tank Bigsby's a better runner than him. He's super not.
And this is the thing about, with Kenneth Walker, why I wanted to litigate it a little bit, because you mentioned the Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt thing. And in terms of a stylistic, or workload split, I think that's a pretty good comp. But when Nick Chubb gets brought up, he's kind of the mold that we're talking about with Etienne, a bigger version and a better version. But he is highly consistent. His success rate is awesome, Nick Chubb. And he's also just crushing it with breakaway runs. He's like the best pure runner in the game, right? I think that doesn't get said constantly for no reason. Walker is not at all consistent. His success rate was terrible last year. Dalvin Cook had the worst success rate in the league among running backs with 200 plus carries. According to NFL Next Gen, Ezekiel Elliott was second worst. Kenneth Walker, third worst. So I think he's like extremely susceptible to another running back coming in and stealing the types of carries where you want someone to do the right thing, which are goal line carries, right? Like you want a guy to hit the right hole, especially near the goal line. Who cares? This guy could rip off a 30-yard run. Well, we're on the 5. So we just want the guy to hit the hole and pick up the yards that are blocked and get us down to the 1 and hopefully in the end zone, right? So they drafted Zach Charbonnet with a second-round pick. That's like who he is. He's a big battering ram. Like that's a problem. Also, he's a better pass catcher, better yards per out run in college.
I gotta figure out if Charbonnet ever played linebacker to figure out if that's why Corain liked him so much.
He might have, dude. I bet he played high school linebacker.
Like he was like a top recruit coming out of high school. He was a running back because he was like really heralded when he went to Michigan, and then Harbaugh buried him.
I'm googling Zach Charbonnet linebacker.
Are you a Devi guy? Do you play Devi, Jacob?
Yeah. And Campus to Canton.
So these are all all the 5-star recruits. You're deep into you have Baby Gronk on a roster.
I've had Charbonnet rostered in a Campus to Canton league since he was at Michigan. Yeah. I remember like being like mad at Harbaugh, and then I was like so excited when he transferred to UCLA, and then I was so pumped when he was going to get round 2 draft capital. And I was so mad when Pete Carroll decided to ruin what was supposed to be my immediate RB2. No, it's Devy's a different beast for sure. I don't know if he ever played linebacker in high school.
It doesn't appear that he played linebacker, but my take isn't like, oh, Zach Charbonnet's so good. It's that like there's a Zach Charbonnet, like the guy that we didn't want to show up for Kenneth Walker, like is Zach Charbonnet. Competent enough on receiving downs to be a problem for Walker, given that that's a huge weakness for him. And then potentially really well suited to goal line work, which was a underrated weakness for Kenneth Walker, just in terms of being the consistent rusher. He scored a bunch of touchdowns. This is a profile that's like under threat, like under serious threat by a 2nd round pick.
And this is the opposite, I think, with Travis Etienne, where I think a lot of people like don't. This isn't like derogatory. I'm like, oh, I'm the Devy guy, but like I just think a lot of people don't necessarily come with a lot of preconceived notions about a lot of college players, which is fine. And then what happens is that people have a lot of preconceived notions about the NFL players. Team drafts on their player at their position, and I feel like we just map on the traits that the player that's already exists doesn't have, and we assume that that's what the new guy is. I think that's actually the case with Charbonnet, where like he complements Walker well, where his weaknesses are Walker's strengths, his strengths are Walker's weaknesses. I think because Tank Bigsby's name is Tank, people assume that that's kind of who Tank Bigsby is too, but he's not. Like if the Jacksonville Jaguars
false
drafted,
advertising.
It is false advertising. Like if the Jacksonville Jaguars drafted Roshan Johnson, that would be the guy where it's like, oh, like, you know, maybe Etienne does take too many risks, which doesn't show up in the data, but that's what people think. And okay, Etienne's bad in pass pro, not that good of a pass catcher. Roshan Johnson, great pass protector, good pass catcher. Like that would make sense. Tank Bigsby is like the diet Travis Etienne profile. Like his weaknesses in college are he takes too many risks and he has like a lot of receptions, but isn't actually that natural or efficient of a pass catcher. And then his pluses is like he's like pretty good in the open field and he's like a sufficient athlete. Like I just think that that's more like a complementary backfield. I think they probably like what Travis Etienne gave them. They probably don't want to give him 350 carries, but Tank kind of comes in, does the same stuff, so they can just run the same formation the whole game. I like Etienne better than Walker, but at the same time, like I also think Etienne's path to legendary upside is narrow. Like I think it is a tight one.
He would really have to, but I mean, both of these guys, I think, are drawing thin there. They would both really have to expand parts of their game that they have not expanded to this point.
Yeah. In terms of the Tank Bigsby stuff, Cam Akers is one of the closest comps for him.
Yeah, that makes sense.
In my stuff. And, you know, I think stylistically, that's like Cam Akers breaks tackles. He's not a great breakaway runner. He's like fine as a receiver, but mostly he's kind of held down 3rd down snaps and not done anything with them. You know, he's like out there, but he doesn't really get targeted a ton. So I think that's who Bigsby is, which is basically, diet Travis Etienne.
It's interesting too. Like Akers and Bigsby both had a kind of the same like film rap on them coming out of college, which was like they weren't very efficient as runners, but then you could be like their O-line was horrible. They played on this terrible team in a good conference. Like kind of the narrative around them coming out was also similar. Which makes sense with Akers. Let's go into this next here. We'll go a little bit more briefly. Maybe pick one guy that you either think is interesting because they're really underpriced or interesting because they're really overpriced. Next group of running backs, we have Javonte Williams, we have Dameon Pierce, we have DeAndre Swift, Davis Mattek's favorite player. We have J.K. Dobbins, Derrick Henry, and that's it until all the way up to the 7-12. So that takes you from the end of the 5th round through the 6th round. We can go through our ranks. I'll start with Pat. Who's a guy in that group that you're either aggressively buying or aggressively selling?
Well, I mean, we should talk Najee Harris, right?
Oh yeah, we had managed to avoid Najee Harris. Do we need
to?
Yeah.
Well, Jacob has him at 50 and I have him at 81, so I feel like we should discuss.
I've got him at 78, and that felt rich.
Sure. Okay. So for the record, Najee Harris's current ADP is 48. I am 2 spots behind ADP, and I have been just getting beaked relentlessly for being the Najee guy.
Trent Richardson kept getting drafted until he was out of the league.
I have I literally have 2% Najee.
Yeah,
Harris
where did he
exposure
finish his
in
career?
Dynasty.
Didn't someone send a first for him?
Yeah, oh my god, post-traumatic stress disorder.
Oh, speaking of memory wipe, I had completely forgotten that had happened.
Yeah, he was made a healthy scratch in a playoff game for Dan Boom Heron. That is the thing.
Oh man, that's a name. That's an all-time. Remember this guy.
I actually talked about Dan Heron on Twitter one time, and then Dan Heron himself found my tweet and he quote tweeted me. He was like, "Thanks, man." I made a Dan Heron appreciation tweet or whatever, and I was like, "Oh man, that's sick." I love Dan Heron.
That's amazing.
I mean, Trent Richardson's career doesn't even make any sense, dude. He
does not.
He was out of football in 3 years.
Wow.
Was he what was his deal, man?
He was bad. That was his
deal. I know
he
was
might
bad.
Have had some Eddie Lacy weight management issues.
Yeah. I mean, he came up to the CFL after he was cut by the Colts, and he was horrible in the Canadian Football League. The Saskatchewan Roughriders were like, "Oh, we're gonna bring in Trent Richardson," and then he got played off the field by Canadian college players who ran a 4.8. It was embarrassing.
He's currently a running back for the. I'm not even gonna go in this direction. He's playing in the Mexican Football League, though.
That's tough.
He was the 2019 AAF rushing touchdowns leader. So happy ending to the Trent Richardson story.
Okay, I don't know what you guys want from me. I feel like I'm being gaslit for having a slightly below market stance on Najee Harris, just because you guys have an obscenely below market stance on Najee Harris. Is 81 necessary? Do we need to be that low on Najee Harris? Why
you are higher on Najee Harris than Nick Chubb? Why?
Najee Harris is younger, has more insulated value, has a very easy path.
Insulated value.
He has no insulated value because
with this.
Everyone hates him.
The Pittsburgh Steelers do not hate him. Pittsburgh Steelers are his current employer.
Give it another 6 months.
Are the most the Steelers are the most conservative, we stand by our guys organization of any team in the NFL. They let Benny Snell remain on their team throughout the duration of his rookie contract. I just don't think that Najee Harris is under any serious threat. That is true. He played all 4 years, and then he was.
Wow.
He absolutely did. They even let him learn special teams. I just don't think that the Steelers think that Najee Harris is bad. I don't think there's any evidence of this. He was not a particularly inspiring running back. There's no question about that. I just think that we're getting a little bit overconfident in terms of how we're projecting the ascension of Jaylen Warren, who, whatever bad faith narratives have floated around about Tony Pollard, where it's oh, he's just getting the empty net carries, he's just coming in and running draw plays. Of course he has good efficiency. That's not actually been particularly true of Tony Pollard. That is fairly true of Jaylen Warren. I think that his stats are quite boosted up by getting a lot of easy work while Najee is grinding out the tough yards. And I don't think that Najee's an inspiring talent.
This is my favorite argument. This is my favorite argument. That
this was the Zeke argument. This was the Zeke argument last year.
Right. But it's actually, but here's the thing here's the problem with Zeke. Okay.
You've become a Zeke truther. Look at you.
Yeah. Okay. It's about to get worse. Just buckle in. Okay. Ezekiel Elliott was still a useful fantasy piece until he stopped being useful in the receiving game. Ezekiel Elliott, he went from actually great to bad but useful to actively bad. But we have seen several big, high pedigree, mediocre running backs churn out a lot of useful fantasy seasons. Leonard Fournette has been an extraordinarily successful fantasy running back for the entirety of his career, no matter how bad that we think he is, because he's large, he understands his assignments, and he catches passes. That's really all you need. You just need touches, size, pass catching. I think that Najee Harris has that. Frankly,
he doesn't have the pass catching. This is the thing that people get wrong about Najee. He isn't a good pass catcher. He got a bunch of targets from Ben Roethlisberger once, and Alabama split him out wide a couple times or whatever, and people got all excited. He's never been a particularly efficient pass catcher. He dropped to 0.77 yards per route run last year, which is bad. That's a straight up bad number. Sure. He was at 0.97 as a rookie. Then he dropped. Since 2021, since he entered the league, he ranks running back 33 in ESPN's receiver ratings. He is not an impressive receiver, and Jaylen Warren was surprisingly impressive as a receiver last year. I think that it's the Zeke argument all over again. Because, yeah, if he was Fournette, if he was going to soak up all the receiving stuff, I think you'd have a much stronger case. But the receiving stuff is a bright red, flashing red flag here. Like, it's a real concern. And then you also have the rushing efficiency, which is really bad. I mean, to bring up Zeke again, the only running back who had a lower rush yards over expected last year than Najee Harris was Zeke. Leonard Fournette, actually, third worst last year. I mean, it's a kind of a rude thing to do to Harris because it's a volume metric, and he did take a lot of volume, which we generally like, but he was racking up negative yards last year. I do think, again, this is after a rookie year that was also very unimpressive. I don't even have confidence that he's the best running back on the Steelers. And by the way, Jaylen Warren, 215 pounds. He's not like a tiny little guy. Like, if they were to just be like, let's make this a 1A, 1B, Najee's the 1A, but we're just going to split this up a little bit more. Death for Najee. He can't handle that because unless the only out I see is that it really has just been injuries the last 2 years, and that he is much more explosive than we've seen.
That's
thus far.
That's what the bag defenders say. I've been getting a lot of this on Twitter, is that people are saying, actually, didn't you know Najee Harris was injured last year? To which I say,
this Frank injury.
Everyone's injured all the time, bro.
Yeah, I don't think that Najee's good. Like, I'm not going to say that Najee's good. I didn't think he was good as a prospect. I had him as RB3 in his class coming out. I didn't like him coming in as a rookie. I don't like him now. Experiencing the Leonard Fournette season in 2021 as a non-Leonard Fournette drafter, and then experiencing the Josh Jacobs season in 2022 as a barely Josh Jacobs drafter, it's leaving me with a desire not to be too overconfident in my stances regarding running back talent translating to fantasy value. Like, and also just in my stance regarding running back talent, period. Like, I thought that Josh Jacobs was a relatively average NFL running back. And then last year he performed as one of the best NFL running backs in the league. Like, not just in fantasy, but he was actually real life awesome. And I don't know that we had a whole lot of reason to believe that he was real life awesome prior to that in the data. I think it's unlikely that Najee Harris posts a Josh Jacob-esque season.
Jacobs was much better than Harris has been thus far. But I agree that he was not. There was no reason to think he was going to be awesome, and he was borderline awesome in the efficiency last year.
Yeah, I'm just saying that I'm just open-minded to Najee Harris being good, where there's a price that I'll take him. It's not like he's not a target for me. I'm not like going out of my way to acquire Najee Harris. I am below ADP on Najee Harris, but I think that the market has factored in a lot of the downward efficiency risk. Like, Jaylen Warren, like, we're talking about an undrafted free agent who posted some fancy efficiency stuff on a bunch of draw plays. Like, I just don't think that this guy is like a legitimate talent. If he's better than Najee Harris, that's because Najee sucks, which is entirely possible. But I just don't foresee Jaylen Warren coming in and stealing his job the way that Tony Pollard did. I just don't know that Jaylen Warren is actually that level of talent.
It's not about even stealing his job in most scenarios, because this is the problem when a guy isn't very good, right? It's not that Jaylen Warren's going to come in and take over the backfield and, now you're in trouble as a Najee drafter in Dynasty. No, you're in trouble if Jaylen Warren is able to carve out any slice of the backfield in a meaningful way, because Harris has not shown any explosiveness dating back to Alabama. I mean, that was the big red flag coming out, right? Is that, like, he had runs over 20 plus yards. Like, he's just a chunk play runner. Well, his success rate since entering the league has been poor in both seasons. So he's not even doing the chunk play thing, right? He's not consistent. He really has yet to flash anything. Harris hasn't flashed anything. So
no, dude, he had 14 targets in that one game.
Yeah, in that one game, he had 14 targets. Yeah, targets, a stat that, definitely reflects running back talent.
All right, I'm moving him down. Okay, I'm moving him down. I'm not moving him down to the 80s. But
you don't have to move him to 80s. But I do want to let me defend Jaylen Warren a tad bit here, which to the rushing efficiency, all I'll say is that he's bigger than you probably think, right? He seems like in your head he's 205, but he's 215. So the rushing,
he was a real workhorse his final season at Oklahoma State.
Yeah, so he could be like more of a problem for Harris than just a satellite back. But even as like a satellite back, undrafted free agent, this could be just like a flash in the pan type of thing. But in ESPN's receiver ratings, he was tied with Austin Eckler for second behind Christian McCaffrey. He really impressed as a receiver, as a rookie. He also had 1.24 yards per route run. That's probably closer to like a true reflection of his talent level, which is like a solid number, but not a great number. But again, Najee was horrendous last year at 0.77, 1.24. Good showing. That's my main concern with Najee is that like we saw from his rookie year to his sophomore year, a big decline in snap share, right? He was like one of the few guys getting absolutely every touch as a rookie. He wasn't quite that guy last year. I think he could fall to like, the 60% range in a decent number of outcomes this season. So, and if he does, like, then you better hope he was really hurt the last couple of years because he's not shown anything to be able to deliver.
Well, those two things are linked, right? Like Najee Harris is our first round pick. If he comes out and it is just the injuries and he's good, then he's going to get a million carries. Like it's not going to be a scenario where he's getting 60% of the workload and he's good. Like he's either going to be good and he's going to get all the workload, or he's going to not be good. Like he's either going to get a big workload and be good, he's going to get a big workload and be not good, or he's going to be not good and he's going to get a small workload. He's not going to get a small workload and be good. Like if he's good, they're giving him carries. But I agree.
That's a good point. Which gives you a payoff.
Yeah.
Because if he's good, he'll get carries. Yeah.
So I moved him down. I agree with you on further reflection that there's not really any excuse to have him ahead of Nick Chubb. And honestly, if you had asked me without looking at my sheet, if I had him ahead of Nick Chubb, I probably would have said no. So that was a bad take. I also moved him behind Kenneth Walker just because I don't even know. I think I need to move Kenneth Walker down too, but I don't know. He's so far behind ADP, he's buried. I moved him down to 66, which is a substantial drop. I moved him behind a couple of the tight ends, a couple of the quarterbacks, some of the wide receivers that I think have a higher payoff ceiling. And on like, I think I balance like trying to be fair to Najee Harris's upside. It's just the path to like 18 points per game just seems pretty clear, right? Which is that all you need is the Steelers to decide to give him enough work to get 18 points per game. Because he doesn't actually have to do anything to deserve 18 points per game beyond that, really. Like if he just absorbs carries and targets, he's going to score points.
I mean, yeah, you're not wrong. It's just that all the indications we have. Well, I mean, another problem is that like Pickett is not throwing to the running backs at the same rate that Ben did. So like the big thing that worked for him as a rookie doesn't seem to be there. It's like, I just have seen this story before. His name was Clyde Edwards-Helaire, which is that they tried to make it work. Yeah. And then in year 3, they were like, we can't do this shit anymore. In a perverse way, it's actually a problem if the Steelers get better, because then their offensive possessions are going to matter to them more. And they're less likely to just be like, let's just give this dude the ball. Like if they're kind of in it in the division, that's where you see, I think, more Jalen Warren, actually.
This is just totally vibesy, but I just think that like coaches never give players like Clyde and like DeAndre Swift the benefit of the doubt. Like they see like a small little guy and they're just like, this guy can't hack it. And then if they do anything wrong, it just confirms their priors. Whereas players like Najee Harris get so much leash. Like I just think,
let's be fair to the Chiefs here.
Clyde
didn't just do a couple things wrong.
No, I'm not saying it I'm not saying Clyde is a victim. Like Clyde was properly punished for his ineptitude, but I just think like Najee Harris he will get an undeserved lead. Like Leonard Fournette has been actively detrimental for most of his career and like continued to get chance after chance. He posted like 5 RB1 fantasy seasons. Like I guess
he was cut after his third year by the Jaguars, but
true. And another team said, "Come on in, Lenny, win us a Super Bowl."
Yeah,
I don't know. I think that the one thing you've sold me on the most is Najee's receiving ceiling being a little bit worse than I think I had in my head. Because if he doesn't have that, then you're right. Then he's, I don't know, who's like an example of like a bad running back who just gets carries. I guess maybe that's the problem. There's not that many bad running backs who only get carries.
Right.
There's usually good running backs who get a lot of carries, or bad running backs who can do everything.
Yeah. The guy I want to talk about is Dameon Pierce, because
that's what I was going to bring up.
I feel like he's got such asymmetric upside in 2 ways. The first being if the team is better than they were last year. If if CJ Stroud is, let's say that CJ Stroud ends up being, as a rookie, 20% better than Davis Mills, because Davis Mills led the NFL in interceptions. he had a 5.8 adjusted yards per attempt, 78 quarterback rating. I've honestly never seen a QBR in the 30s before for a guy who played the entire season, but Davis Mills did. So let's give CJ Stroud a 50 QBR, which is pretty bad. That is a lot better than the quarterback play they were getting last year. Dameon Pierce faded. I guess theoretically he's still fading Kareem Hunt, but I mean, what's the difference between Devin Singletary and Kareem Hunt?
I think he's protected by Singletary to an extent.
I agree. And he was pretty good last year when he had any room to move. The issue was he very frequently did not have any room to move. I mean, he was like, there are a lot of games in here, 10 carries for 8 yards, right? Like that was a real game that happened. Like these happened multiple times, but he was pretty good. And I think we have a lot of evidence that this Florida coaching staff that he played at when he was in college, like you go look at their roster and you're like, why was this dude not playing? Well, one, I think we gained a little bit of information on Malik Davis, who was looking pretty good in the NFL last year. That's who he was splitting carries with in the backfield. I also think we learned they just weren't playing Kadarius Toney for some reason, who probably attitude related, but he looks like a guy who, when he's on a field in the NFL, is pretty good. Just weird stuff. I think the evidence we have suggests Pierce is an above average quality running back in the NFL who was in one of the WOT situations last year that you could ever possibly be in. And I don't think the upside of both him playing more on passing downs, so they would take him off for like Rex Burkhead and shit last year, and the offense getting better, I don't think that's priced in at all. I think he's being traded as like a Philip Lindsay ass running back, and I think he's probably better than that.
I agree with everything that you said. Dameon Pierce, one of my favorite running backs to watch the NFL. I think he's real life, #good at football. There's a guy who does fantastic running back analysis, Noah Hills at No More Parties on Twitter, who has created a lot of these metrics that primarily measure running backs against other running backs in their backfield. One of his metrics is the Bay rating, which is box adjusted efficiency rating, and then relative success rate, which is based off of essentially how he's performing versus other running backs in his backfield overall and on a success rate basis. Dameon Pierce's box adjusted efficiency rating last year was 166%, which means he's 66% better than all other Houston running backs. And a relative success rate
feels low,
plus 7.4%, which is just insanely massive. Those are both like well over the 90th percentile. And similar to college, like he was a 10% plus relative success rate player in college, 118% Bay rating in college. He's always been a really effective runner. Devin Singletary has been fairly middling. And the nice thing too with Singletary is like he's not really a pass catcher. He's traditionally been quite a low yards per outrun running back. I think there's not like
he's a good pass blocker though, I think, right? Like he might
he's a good pass blocker. Right. He's a good pass blocker. Here's my only issue with Pierce. Like, yeah, I think that how good he is underrated just based off of how bad his environment was. And I understand that all the other running backs on Houston were total trash, but like it went from they were actually a pretty somewhat effective running team when they gave it to Pierce versus like they were the worst running team of all time when they gave it to anybody else. I think that shows how much work he was putting in. Only issue is I just don't know if Pierce is good at anything that really gets you a lot of fantasy points. Like I feel like Pierce is good at making good decisions and breaking tackles and turning 4-yard gains into 5-yard gains on loop. But he's probably like an unspecial pass catcher. I'm not going to say he's a bad pass catcher, but I don't think he's like a great one. He graded out pretty poorly as a pass blocker. And then we've never seen him sustain a full workload over a full season in college or the NFL. So, and then the offense is probably below average. So it's just hard for me to sell myself on how this talent pays off to an elite fantasy ceiling. Because at least with Rhamondre, it's the
Najee Harris argument. Yeah. It's just that he plays a ton and the offense is better than it was last year.
But if I'm betting on a guy with low pedigree, I would just rather bet on an archetype that's more fun than Najee Harris. Like I'm okay. Like I don't even really want to bet on Najee Harris, but at least
both pedigree. Davis and I are betting on Harris, betting on Pierce above Harris. We both have him ranked above Harris.
So to me, that's like two. I mean, And
That's
I love
too.
trying to make
That's way too
talent-based
IK
running back
for Jacob.
decisions. That is too IKB for me. Like I think Dameon Pierce is clearly a better running back than Najee Harris, but I just think that's a lot of confidence in our talent take to do that. Where I think Najee Harris will continue to get chances.
It's not that much confidence. It's just like I mean, so to me, like, you know, with best ball, right? There's been kind of this push to like factor in the market and let the kind of wisdom of the crowds help you make decisions, which I think generally I agree with. In Dynasty, though, I want to be more focused on where the market is going. And my feeling on Harris is like most people are kind of already out. It's sort of like we're waiting for everyone else just to be like, oh, this guy stinks. So like, I don't care. Like if I'm just avoiding a guy and just like this ADP is straight up terrible, I'm not touching it. Like that's how I play Dynasty. You know, like I think finding those broken ADPs and just avoiding them. And then my assessment is that I'm not as high on Pierce as Davis is. So I see it maybe a little bit less of the asymmetric upside, but I see it enough, you know, like he flashed some real talent. We're getting a rushing scheme here that generally creates efficient running backs. Offense might be scoring a lot more points. Devin Singletary is not a special talent. If Devin Singletary is a problem, and I draft a decent amount of Devin Singletary in best ball because I'm like, maybe Pierce just isn't that good. And he'll get, you know, plenty of carries. But that happens probably because Pierce disappoints more than Singletary does something. Like if Pierce is good, he has an opportunity here to emerge. And yeah, the pedigree is not really there. It's a low floor play, but if one of these guys is like really exciting and hot on the trade market after the year, I feel like it's Pierce.
I mean, people got very frothy about him in general when he started to break out last year. Like people were getting really excited about him. So I can see it.
No, I mean, I'm only 4 spots behind you, Pat. I think that it's just that even with my revised ranking, you're I think still 15 spots behind me on Najee Harris. So it's not that formerly 31
I've got some Najee thoughts for sure.
You've got me halfway back to your position. You probably got a full 16.
I actually raised him slightly.
There you go.
I had him behind Derrick Henry and Hollywood Brown. I was like, that's probably a little too much. So I
the biggest upset in our rankings is that somehow you guys cheated and got lower on DeAndre Swift than me. I thought I was like 30 spots behind.
Nobody has disliked DeAndre Swift more vocally and more aggressively for a longer period of time than I have. I don't think.
He stinks.
I think Josh Norris doesn't like. He's been pretty anti-Swift.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. Norris and Winks. I actually used to be pretty pro Swift, and then we turned really hard to anti-Swift last offseason. They were out on Swift like going into year 2, which I was.
What's the historical comps on running backs who get benched for Justin Jackson and traded for a 4th round pick that the team that traded for him can get back in a compensation pick if they just let him rot on their bench? What's the range of outcomes there?
It's not great. I mean, DeAndre Swift is like, let's talk about him because his ADP remains like it's coming down a little bit, but he still goes in the 6th round. You can get such good football players after DeAndre Swift as Brandon Ayuk, Calvin Ridley, Zay Flowers, Jahan Dotson.
These are real picks here. This is legit.
Real players that are valued by NFL teams. Players that NFL teams want on their teams. Actually, yeah. Swift tilts me a lot because like I've been such an adamant like Tony Pollard truther, but I truther for a lot of running backs without a lot of draft capital that I think are legitimately good. Like I've always been very vocally for these guys. Like I've done it for Rhamondre, do it for Khalil Herbert. And one of the pushbacks you always get with these running backs is like, oh, you know, especially Pollard was like, he's just getting these easy touches. He's just doing it against light boxes. You know, he's not actually a workhorse. Like he's not actually that talented. It's just inflated. And then to see DeAndre Swift like raised up as some sort of martyr, I was like, oh man, he's such an incredible talent. I can't believe Detroit would do this to him. And it's like, he's not. Detroit used him correctly last year. He's an explosive player. He's a good receiver. And he has glaring weaknesses. His success rate is terrible. It's always been terrible.
It's terrible. It's always been terrible.
Right. It's terrible and it's always been terrible. And he is light. He makes inefficient decisions. And you do look at his carries, and it's like, well, look at all of his effective rushing stats last year on net. And it's like, yeah, because in 2021, they fed him a bunch of grinder carries. He sucked across the board as a rusher in 2021. In 2022, they gave him a bunch of tendency breaking carries, outside runs, out of shotgun. They used them almost exclusively against light boxes. And then his numbers looked really good overall, despite a bad success rate, because he was put in more advantageous positions. And so a higher percentage of his carries ended up being big plays. He's a useful NFL player, but like, he's actually the guy that people say that the Tony Pollard is, where he's actually just the explosive fantasy player instead of the all-around running back, which is fine if you're Philly and you're spending a 4th round pick to acquire him and probably getting a 5th round pick back as a comp pick when you let him walk. It's maddening to me. I think that people see him as this like incredible talent that's been hard done by in the NFL when he's actually been given several opportunities to succeed that he didn't take advantage of and has then been used in a tailored role to his skill set. I think he's a role player.
He is a role player.
Good role.
He's a role player, yeah. And what I would say, too, I mean, so he's going, I'm looking at some of the ADP here, and, you know, he's going in Dynasty at a similar price to his redrafted best ball ADP. And to me, that's like right there. That makes no sense.
I'm actually drafting him in best ball a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, I am too.
Yeah.
Okay. And he's not like a big target for me, but when he falls past ADP and I can scoop him where I need a running back, I'm excited to draft him.
I'll take him. I take him on some Hurts teams too.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I love doing that. So I'm not like out on his, but his chances of turning in a really good season. I mean, he's behind the PFF just put out their offensive line rankings. Eagles still number 1, Obviously, you're going to have a tough time stopping an explosive runner and receiver. I mean, he's not just an explosive receiver. He is an explosive runner. 100%. He just is always looking for the home run, and he never does what is asked of him. That might actually work in Philadelphia. It might work. If Rashad Penny gets banged up, which is, probably unfortunately going to happen, then there could be a lot of carries there, and, he could be a really fun spike week type of player. But if you think about the two formats, best ball is the one where you really, really want to prioritize ceiling, and Dynasty is the one where we care more about floor, future value. What's a bad season going to do to this asset?
What are DeAndre Swift Dynasty buyers even hoping? Like, are they hoping he stays on the Eagles? Are they hoping he gets?
They're hoping for that same ceiling outcome, but the payoff isn't even necessarily like as big as it is in best ball, right? Like the single season outcome in best ball could win you a ton of money. In Dynasty, like, does he even get re-signed? Like, what do you it's just
I really don't know what you're hoping for in Dynasty.
Right. I think there's just such a divide between, I think, how NFL teams view DeAndre Swift and how fantasy managers view DeAndre Swift. Like, it's just
you never want to be in on the fantasy manager side of that. You really don't.
Like, if you just think of it in a vacuum and you forget the names attached and you look at what Philly did, right? And you just think of, like, what if this is how they attacked the linebacker position, right? It is kind of how they attack, right? It's like TJ Edwards, they lose him in free agency. And like Howie Roseman probably views running backs and linebackers kind of the same, where it's like low value positions that, we're going to try and attack in creative ways to get decent value out of. It's like, we lost Miles Sanders in free agency. Cool. We're going to do it in our system. All right. We have Kenny Gainwell, who's like a decent enough player that we're paying very little money. Oh, and we'll take an interesting shot on Rashad Penny for almost no money. He's provided some good value. And then, yeah, sure, we'll send a 4th round pick to the Lions for DeAndre Swift and maybe get a comp pick back. Why not? Like, they're just taking shots to assemble, a bunch of usable pieces for their backfield and going to see how it works out. Like, it's not like DeAndre Swift comes in, I don't think, as like their preordained answer to the running back position. I don't think that they think that they need to have an answer to the running back position. He's the most fantasy friendly of the three. Maybe he's even the best of the three, like, overall. I think probably Penny provides the most value per touch, but it's just like, if he walks to free agency next year, like, let's say he has like a median season this year, right? And he pays off his best ball ADP, but he's not like a smash hit or whatever. Like, I just think he's going to get like a 2-year, $8 million contract with someone, and people are going to lose their minds. Like I just don't think that he's valued as like some incredible talent. I think he's a really useful player, but I don't think the Eagles landing spot is really good for him from a real life perspective. Like you said, Pat, about the good offensive line, him being an explosive runner, him being an explosive pass catcher. Not great from a fantasy standpoint.
I would much rather
61 total targets to running backs last year.
Yeah.
I would much rather have Devin Etienne in Dynasty than DeAndre Swift. Like, much rather.
I think I have them pretty similarly.
I have Swift ahead of Etienne, but I don't have a
Chain's. I feel like a Chain's bad cases are like he becomes this bit player that we're expecting Swift to be.
Jacob just breathed a sigh of relief to realize he had Etienne ahead, and I'm the lone person who doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even love like Etienne and like rookie drafts and stuff, but like I don't care about this Dalvin Cook stuff at all, really. Which
for Dynasty, yeah,
Dalvin Cook.
You're right.
Dalvin Cook
I should have Etienne ahead.
Dalvin Cook is Jeff Wilson Jr. to Etienne for Dynasty purposes. Like
I hope that Dalvin Cook goes to Miami because I have not been able to draft that much Devin Etienne in my rookie drafts. Just because he keeps going like so highly. So it'd be nice to get into him after Cook. But I don't know. I feel like we're just beating up on DeAndre Swift, the poor guy. But
just draft him in best ball. Like you don't have to.
Exactly.
Dynasty is a very specific form of fantasy football, and I think there's ways to attack the format. And Swift does not really fit those ways. And look, he could fit those ways if he had an ADP of like 120 in Dynasty, and he's like,
then he would be Antonio
75. Yeah, then you're like, okay, I'm in. I'm getting, this market is giving me a huge discount, but it's not. It's treating him as if he's the same play in Dynasty. He's a worse play in Dynasty. The floor is much worse. So, just he's a year-to-year bet. If you like this year's setup, draft him in a yearly format.
I agree with that. And I probably will be roughly with or maybe even over the market in best ball. We're running a little low on time here, running quickly to the next tier. We'll do this as a rapid fire. There's this like group of young running backs who we're not particularly sure if they're any good, but they are going to potentially get a chance to lead their backfield this year. And they're all kind of going at the same range. And that would be Rachaad White, Isaiah Pacheco, Cam Akers, James Cook. If you had to pick one of these guys, I'll throw Alexander Madison in here too, even though he's not actually that young. If you were to pick any of these guys to go out and buy, who would you pick? Or you can answer nobody if that's your answer.
These all feel like particularly bad buys. I guess depending on the context of your team, generally speaking, rebuilding teams are not buying day 3 capital running backs, right? Like it just doesn't feel like a wise way. And if you're a winning team, if you're a team that can win this year, couldn't you just get Joe Mixon, who like projects for way more median points? So it's like this is why Dynasty is so fascinating, because there's such a middling of like, we all expect these guys to score points. They all go much higher in redraft than they do in Dynasty, but like due to the changing nature of the NFL, like 3 of these guys could be out of football in 2 years, or these guys could all be Isaiah Crowell, like so fast. It's unbelievable. I would say the one that has the best ability to carve out a role where he's like he becomes Najee Harris, like he's like a trap back next year, would be Rachaad White, where the Buccaneers are a little bit better than we expect. They don't really use any of these other shitty running backs they have. He gets like 70% of the running back touches. Actually, kind of like how Cam Akers has been viewed, where Akers has been, people have loved Akers and they've hated Akers and they loved Akers, and then Akers was going to get released or traded, and then actually he was the lead back. Well, like I could see White going on that.
Well, you just named him. That's the guy I'm going to pick, and it's begrudgingly. Like, I think I need to just reevaluate how I view Cam Akers. Like I liked Cam Akers coming out. I was very excited about him coming off his rookie year. Till these happened. He like retained way too much value going into that offseason. I sold all my shares. And I feel like I was like so happy that I made like what seemed like a really good choice of like cashing him out at round 1 pick value and then watching his value plummet, that I just like refused to accept that he might have a comeback. He seems like a pretty decent bet in terms of, we just kind of talked about with Najee Harris, where it's like he's big, he can theoretically play every down, and he has the pedigree. Like Cam Akers did have a game of 100% of the snaps last year. He does have the pedigree, and the Rams offense is probably not going to be that bad. Like it's fragile, but Stafford's going to play. Cooper Kupp's going to play. And that's probably the guy that I might be willing to bet on. And the nice thing you get with Akers too, I'm going to probably move him up. I don't have him ranked very highly. I'm going to have to move him up. Davis is by far the highest.
I was enjoying hanging out with you down there in the Cam Akers fade zone. I'm sad to see you go.
I think I'm going to be joining Davis a little, maybe not quite up at 80 plus, but I guess the thing that gets me about Akers is like, what if it comes out week one, he has 95% of the snaps, and all of a sudden, like he now goes in the 5th round.
But it's 4th year of his rookie deal. I mean, he's to me, he's another best ball play. Like he's a second round pick, true. Right? There's probably they're not going to re-sign him, right? I mean, they talked about how they're kind of retooling the roster. I mean, he's just it's a best.
You know what this exercise is kind of.
I think I need to draft him more in best balls. Maybe what I'm talking myself into is less that I need to draft more in Dynasty.
There's about 50 good players in Dynasty, and then a bunch of dudes who are completely interchangeable. And I wonder, I haven't, I'm not old enough to know this, but I wonder if like 10 years ago that same thing would have been true, or if teams and contracts were more straightforward and guys stayed in their roles for longer. And if this is like a new NFL thing where it's like you got to pay your quarterback $1 billion so everyone else becomes more replaceable to some degree. But it is like, I mean, we got to running back 20, and I was like, I wouldn't trade a 2nd round pick for this guy.
The best thing that you can do in your Dynasty startup, in my opinion, is before we really get into the draft, trade like your 5th and your 6th round pick back down to like an 8th and a 9th round pick and see what that can get you in terms of moving up and getting a second 1st round pick. Because I don't think you're going to like the guys that you draft in the 8th all that much less than the guys that you're going to draft in the 5th. And if you can leverage those fairly fungible distinctions to go get yourself a Lamar Jackson and a Ja'Marr Chase or 2 elite quarterbacks or whatever else, like I'm doing that. That's what I'm really trying to do, because it does get super flat where it's like you get the elite quarterbacks, then you get the really fun young running backs and wide receivers. You get that line of the elite studs. And then it feels like it's like 7 rounds of just like generic starters, and then it's backups. But like it gets really flat from like round 5, 6, even into round like 9, 10. We're talking about guys that we have ranked over 100 at this point. Really quick.
Let me co-sign.
Oh, go for it.
Well, I'll just co-sign Rachaad White real quick. I think he did not have a good year as a rusher. He really didn't, and that's a problem. But I do think we've got a situation here where you have a 2nd-year back who was a really strong receiving prospect, who was actually pretty good as a receiver. Wasn't great, but he was pretty good as a receiver as a rookie. Earned Tom Brady's trust to be out there on true passing down situations, pass blocking situations. So I think someone they're going to trust in the receiving game this year. I feel very confident about that. What I don't feel as confident is that they'll actually treat him as like a true workhorse. But I mean, he is a 2nd-year back, so there's a payoff here. If he is a workhorse, I mean, you're gonna make out like a bandit at this current price. Like you get him in like pick 90. Again, this is another situation where you look at the best ball market. He's going about the same as he is in best ball, but here in Dynasty, you have the chance to resell this guy after a good productive season. You don't get many opportunities like that at running back. A running back hits and then you sell for more than you paid. That's rare. And so White gives you a rare opportunity. We can quibble about how likely it is that happens. I tend to be a little bit bullish on White because of the receiving prospect profile that I really liked. But the point is that if you do get the season, then you get a big resell payoff, which I just find very appealing.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with that. Like I was really out on White in the early offseason at his cost because I just thought he wasn't very good and that he was at pretty high risk of getting spiked in the draft or in free agency. But now that that's done and they have probably one of the worst running back 2 through 4s of any team in the NFL, like, yeah, his all of a sudden his path becomes very, very clear. And like you said, the cost is pretty palatable. So I've been I was really into White as a prospect. It's quite out on him early offseason. I'm warming back up to the idea. Really quick, if you had to buy an old veteran running back, who would be your buy?
Joe Mixon.
That's a good one.
Joe Mixon scores. Joe Mixon doesn't get arrested, doesn't get suspended, doesn't get cut. How many PPR points this year?
I mean, probably like
17 a game.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
and
probably getting
you
250.
You could trade some of your shittiest picks and players for Joe Mixon right now. I mean, straight up.
I just saw him go for a 25-second.
Like, bro, come on.
Wow.
That's like picking.
Sorry, a 25-second and Jeff Wilson, to be fair.
That's like picking up nickels. That's like picking up nickels off the street. I mean, it's not glorious work, but someone's gonna do it, and it feels bad because Joe Mixon's like probably a dickhead, and
he's a bad person and he's bad at football, but he's good at scoring fantasy points.
Yeah. So there's going to be and you're picking up a little bit of tail risk, but he would definitely be the one. I also think, I mean, you guys are both going to disagree with this, but if Kamara serves a 3-game suspension, if that's what ends up happening to him, and you can get him for like literally I've seen him being traded for like I think in Crane, one of our leagues, I believe someone traded the 308 for Alvin Kamara's services.
I'm actually the highest on Kamara among us, although we're all like in the same realm.
Like Kamara could retire tomorrow and you're still winning trading the 308 for him, given that you could get a Kamara season. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I bought some Kamara this offseason. I sent 2 seconds and I got Geno Smith and Alvin Kamara, which like I would probably just send 2 seconds for Geno. So that felt pretty free to me. I'm definitely in on all these guys. Like you made the great point, Davis, right? Like a lot of these younger guys already don't have any insulation. So like if you need a running back, like trading for Isaiah Pacheco is kind of a half measure when you can just trade. I
did this trade in 2 leagues actually where I had shitty firsts I didn't want to make. One of them I traded a shitty first and George Pickens for Geno Smith and Jared Goff. Another one I traded the 109, I think, for Dameon Pierce and Isaiah Pacheco. Like I think that's, and I probably lose that trade in the long run, but I get some points. But I much prefer trading assets I'm not in love with just to get the running back points when I realize I need them versus trying to like prospect and mine for them. You know what I mean? Like just buy the realized asset.
Can I interest you in a round 11 James Conner?
No.
Yeah, sure.
Davis.
I would rather.
That's where you draw the line. That's where you draw the line.
What's the fucking point? What are you hoping to accomplish there? Like
that he does what he just did last year.
But he's playing with Clayton Tune now.
He played with Colt McCoy for half of last year.
Hey, Colt McCoy, professional quarterback.
He might be playing with Colt McCoy again. He's probably better with Colt McCoy than like I don't know if like James Conner is like canned meat. Right? Like he does better in inferior environments. Like he thrives.
Wait, is this like a Canadian reference? What are you talking about? Canned meat does better in inferior environments. What does this mean?
Like, okay, like have you never heard like inferior goods, like the economics term? It's like there's like normal goods and there's inferior goods, right? So it's like in good economic times, like for instance, like steak, right? Like steak is a normal good. Like the better the economy is doing, the more people buy steak. The worse the economy is doing, the less people buy steak.
Gotcha.
But like click is an inferior good. So it's like the better the economy is doing, less people are buying click and spam. But like if the economy is tanking,
the fuck is
sales
click?
Stonks are up.
I have no idea what click is. What is click?
It's spelled KLIK. Google it right now. It's like me. You like pop a little tab and you like spoon it in. It's like really gross.
Okay, I mean that makes sense. Okay,
I know you won $2 million. You don't have to buy click. For the rest of us,
man of the people here.
The rest of us, humble servants.
You guys are eating click now?
I mean,
in Joe Biden's economy, or I guess I'm in Justin Trudeau's economy.
Justin Trudeau's economy, yeah. I mean, James Conner
thrives in adverse environments. Like he just collects 8 dump offs for 30 yards.
Yeah,
it's a good bit.
It's a good bit. I'll say, just one point to circle back to White. If the whole thing I said about like his trade value stuff, do trade him in the offseason. Don't write out another NFL draft and free agency period,
Right.
right
No,
after the
no,
season. If you win right after the season, don't fall in love.
Rachaad White also could be a pretty good click type of player.
Yeah.
Like I could see him racking up a lot of inferior goods points.
100%. Yeah. Total spam player there. I can't say click because I like until I see a picture of this, I'm not gonna say it.
I'm just tweeting it out right now.
Rashad Penny is a guy I'll mention.
Yes, because you can win. This is a spot where you can win.
Yeah, like and again, like compare the two markets, right? Rashad Penny is like what 10th, 11th round pick in best ball.
Yeah,
he's going outside the top 150 picks in Dynasty. And why? Because he's a year-to-year injury risk play. Like, I know. Like, I know, but you're getting the discount. So in Dynasty, like, if I had to pay the exact same for Rashad Penny, wouldn't be as interested because I'm like, is he going to be worth anything after the year? It's just an upside play. I'll play that in best ball. But if you're getting, like a 40 pick discount or something, yeah, sure. Like then that feels good. And if Penny crushes this year, couldn't he be the one who gets re-signed by the Eagles? Couldn't he be on another 1-year deal? He's the better fit for this offense than Swift in some ways. I mean, he actually does have a good success rate. He's explosive and he hits the right hole. He's just a total zero in the passing game. If I had two players, they're both explosive rushers, one is a good receiver and one is a consistent rusher, and I'm putting them on the Eagles offense, I would take the one who's a consistent rusher. I would trade the receiving to get the consistency because that's what's going to better fit this offensive environment. And in Dynasty now, you're getting DeAndre Swift going at his best ball ADP basically, but Penny, this massive discount, and was already the cheaper of the two in best ball. Just feels like kind of an easy way to play it.
I agree, and I honestly love the future, like the post 2023 element. Another guy I was going to bring up in the same round, kind of a similar best ball ADP versus Dynasty ADP is Samaje Perine, but probably way less future payoff on Perine than Penny. But I'm still totally fine. Oh yeah, I'm very into that. Yeah. And then one guy that I do like kind of stashing, like we were talking about it with these tight ends a couple episodes ago about guys you can just kind of buy in on. I like Elijah Mitchell right now, where he's going as a guy that, I mean, in managed leagues, Dynasty, right? Like you want guys that you know when to start. And Mitchell is good at football. I think he has a couple outs. He can be kind of like Madison, except Mitchell's a lot better at football than Madison, I think. But where you had Madison, is like, okay, you're going to, at the worst, you're investing a very limited resource into a guy who is going to be an immediate start every time Cook is out. And you also have some upside of like what happens post Cook, and he rolls 3 cherries on that one. With Mitchell, like that's a guy I think if I'm a smart team, I would target Elijah Mitchell when he comes up for free agency. Like I think that guy can play, and you also have the upside of he's coming up for free agency when Christian McCaffrey is 29. Like what if the San Francisco 49ers just decide like, oh, we're going to be the team that signs Elijah Mitchell to that next contract. And in the meantime, I think you're just storing him on the bench and then keeping him.
Just becomes the next rando 49er, right?
Yeah, it's very possible.
Like like Elijah Mitchell is Raheem Mostert, who was Carlos Hyde, who was, I mean, Tevin Coleman. I
hate to say it, but a prime candidate to be a remember that guy.
Yeah. If I had to pick someone we brought up who was a remember that guy, it'd be like, do you remember when Elijah Mitchell was like who you needed in FFPC in 2021? Then we never heard from him again.
I mean, the only thing I'll say in Mitchell's defense is
I like Mitchell. It's just sort of the NFL. The way
I mean, I'm not saying he's like a high probability bet, but he's going in like pick 140, pick 150s range. I think it's telling about Mitchell that when he was out, they were like, we're giving McCaffrey every carry. And then as soon as Mitchell was active, it's like, now we're doing a carry split thing. Like they clearly view Mitchell as like a much higher caliber player than like TDP, Jordan Mason, whatever their other poo-poo platter is. Like even after they went and got McCaffrey, they were like, we still want to find ways to get this guy involved. And I think that they're right to do that. Like I think he's a solid NFL player. Any other takes here before we head off? I think we're now just over the 2-hour mark.
I mean, I would trade 4th round picks for Jaylen Warren, but the people who have Jaylen Warren probably like him. So it's like, that's why it's no. This is why running backs, it's so easy to just be like, you could get Samaje Perine right now for like literal nothing, the crumbs in your pockets, and like Samaje Perine probably scores like 170 PPR points this year.
Oh, I mean, I'll pull it up. My like at all times, my like most rostered list on my like Dynasty Planet exposure is just the grossest running backs imaginable. Like I'm looking at mine right now. It's like my most rostered player is Jerick McKinnon. After that, it's Samaje Perine. Jaylen Warren is in my top 10. Deonta Foreman is in my top 10. Like people, you just, I mean, if you're in a startup, like I would say 80% of my picks round 13 and later are just backup running backs. And then, you don't have to spend the 5th round pick on the Nick Chubb, and you can just draft your wide receivers.
I do love the Samaje P line. That's hilarious.
Oh yeah. That is for the people. That's been a long running bit, 2-year running, I guess, where basically my take is at a certain point of wide receiver, you just don't want to roster them anymore. Like you don't like why are we rostering like Devontae Parker? Like what's that ever going to do for you? Why are we rostering Paris Campbell? Like there's just
different in best ball. Obviously,
league.
you need guys like that in best ball. They actually pick up a little bit of value.
Exactly. But in a managed format, like you just don't need any wide receiver that isn't either going to be in your lineup or is a rookie or a year 2 player. Like if they're year 3 and plus and they're never going to see your lineup, you just don't need that player. Cut them or trade them for whatever is the least expensive, most available running back with like a theoretical handcuff ceiling. And like that had been Samaje Perine going into last year just because it didn't pay off the year prior. So I had referred to this as the Samaje P line, but not sure who to name it after now that Samaje P line is a round 9 best ball pick.
Yeah.
Our little boy is all grown up.
Yeah, and now Jerome Ford's skyrocketing up. He would have been.
Yeah, that was one. All of like the guys that I was pumping up in the Discord all offseason were Jerome Ford and Ty Chandler, which I guess pat on the back for me, but it's left me with very, very precious few running backs to go after at this point. I'm like a week away from hyping up Zach Moss.
Oh God, is he still on?
Yeah,
is he still?
He's going to be the backup running back for the Colts. Like if Jonathan Taylor sprains his ankle, Zach Moss will be in your lineups and in your hearts.
So all right, after Zach Moss, I actually feel quite comfortable bringing up one last name here. This isn't a veteran guy, but he is in the gross veteran mold in our hearts. I want to give a little love to Bijan Robinson, who is a second-year running back who immediately carved out a role despite being shot in the leg. This guy came in from a gunshot wound and still took over the backfield from Antonio Gibson.
Yeah, you guys keep coming back to that.
Yeah. It seems important, right? It seems important. And I mean, the other thing about Bijan Robinson is he gets kind of crap as not being efficient. He had 3.9 yards per carry last year.
But he got shot in the leg.
Well, also Antonio Gibson had 3.7 yards per carry last year.
Yeah, but the vibes, the Antonio Gibson vibes, though, you got to do the vibe check on Gibson, which is that he seems like he has more yards per carry than that.
And Antonio Gibson is another tautological talent like DeAndre Swift. It's like he's talented because he's talented.
Exactly. And look, I mean,
I drafted Robinson. It's fine.
Robinson was even at this point, I think Gibson's pricey in best ball because he's going ahead of Robinson, but Robinson is consistent as a rusher. He's going to be kind of a chunk play runner, but his success rate was actually pretty good last year. He faced a lot more 8-man boxes than Gibson last year. If the offense takes a step forward and they don't pass a ton more to the running backs, which would help Gibson, but if they just like are scoring more points, they're in, scoring position more often. I think Robinson's probably still the guy at the goal line over Gibson.
Oh, certainly.
So there is a bit of a payoff and there's a bit of this guy doesn't suck. And guess what? He's entering his 3rd year in 2024. So I don't have to worry that, if I trade for Bijan Robinson after the season, after he showed a little something, it's still probably pretty cheap to do so. And you're not like worried about what happens after the year because he's still going to be on his rookie deal even in 2025. So, these second-year backs that the market has decided are bad can offer not like massive wins, but definitely some wins. I mean, David Montgomery after his rookie year, we were like, this guy sucks. Well, he did suck. David Montgomery sucks, but he didn't suck quite as bad as we thought. And so if you're going to make the Najee Harris type of play where it's like the market's overconfident in talent, I would prefer it to be in that second year, where then entering the third year, people will talk themselves into the guy like Jacob's doing now with Najee Harris. And, you can sell it to this sucker.
I've never been gaslit this bad. I already bent the knee. I was already below ADP.
I know.
When we started the recording. I'm now 18 picks behind ADP. I've bent the knee. I've been thinking about Najee and I've fought against it.
But I think of course I'm being a total asshole right now, but I think the point of like these third year backs, people are still kind of in if the projections support them. So if you go 1 year earlier and say who is the market think is horrendously gross is a second year back, but maybe they're not quite as gross as people think, then there's a chance for, we're talking about singles here, not even doubles or triples, but
definitely a fair point. I've got to run here quick because we got PLTC bar exam class starting up here in 10 minutes on the West Coast, but it's been a pleasure. Are we going to do 2 more episodes now? We got to do a tight end quarterback and we have a mailbag to do.
So probably 2 more. I'm out of town next week, so you guys can either do quarterbacks and tight ends without me or wait for me to get back. I don't care.
We'll figure that out in the chat. But been a pleasure as always. Davis, where can people find your services?
They can watch SportsGrid. They can listen to SportsGrid Fantasy Football Podcast. They can listen to the Taekcast, or they can subscribe to the Taekcast Patreon.
And Pat, outside of joining drafts where you're forced to draft Calvin Ridley in the second round, where can people find everything that you're doing?
Yeah, quite an episode of ship chasing last night. LegendaryUpside.com. You can still get $30 off your first year. LegendaryUpside.com/early. I do have like a few underdog credits left as well. You can get a $50 underdog credit right now. You sign up and fill out a form. I need you to fill out that form so I can send your username over to Underdog. That'll be in the description of the pod on my feeds. I've mentioned some success rate stuff a bunch of times. I've got a big article coming out, probably just breaking it in 2 parts at this point. Looking at the NFL Next Gen success rate and what it says about some of these, sneaky underperformers like Bijan Robinson and some of the guys that are quite poor.
Nice. I think that's like been a really underutilized tool in running back analysis for a while. And that sounds fantastic. And then, you can find my stuff on Thinking About Thinking. Just released another best ball article this week over there. I made the case for some of my top guys in the top 100 that I'm building my portfolio around, including Tony Pollard, who we talked about extensively today, as well as J.K. Dobbins, who we literally did not say his name on this podcast, but you can read more about it on Thinking About Thinking, I suppose. We'll be back with 1 or 2 more episodes on this. So pleasure as always, and we will see you next time. Thank you.